And this section is really our first introduction to the national information on the test. If you'll remember from Monday, we talked about how the examination process for getting a real estate license is really broken into two very distinct sections. You have the state-specific section of the exam, and you have the national portion of the exam. Everything we talked about on Monday, which is in Unit 1.1, and everything that's in all of Unit 1, every time we go back to Unit 1, remind me again, are we talking about state-specific things in Unit 1, or are we talking about national things in Unit 1?
State-specific.
State-specific.
It's state-specific, but also, Travis, I think it's more of a Section 1 or Unit 1. It's more of just how do you get a license? You know, it's more about the licensing process.
And it's not just specifically to just state, it's North Carolina real estate specific. It's very, very limited in scope. When we get into Unit 2 is about big topics. It's what is real estate? What is land? And so that's really what we're headed into here, is this difference between the state really sort of restricted, narrow stuff, and then the national sort of big ideas of what is real estate, what is real property. There is going to be a lot of vocabulary in this class. I mean,
and before we get started, I was thinking about this morning. So Monday we talked about on like who needs a license, and while I don't think and I could be wrong, while I don't think we're going to need to know that today, I still think it's important to always keep that in the back of your mind because it's the base.
Absolutely.
Everything.
And I love that you point that out. We don't really ever move on from a topic in this class. What we do is add to, we build upon. And so, you know, what we learned on Monday is going to be the very basic building blocks for who needs to have a license to practice offering real estate services to others for compensation in the state of North Carolina. But today we're going to start to talk about, well, what is this real estate? You know, we talk about a real estate service, but what is real estate? What does it mean to have a piece of real property? And so this class is really largely built on vocabulary. Sharon said she had a question. What's your question, Sharon?
The question was like, after the Unit 1 on Monday, I was going through the materials. There were others like the homework, which was 8 questions, but there were other sections. There were more questions and stuff and more flashcards. Have discussed, maybe we've discussed about it. I just wanted to know, is there any possibility we're going to go over those other questions, not those 8 questions, but there were more stuff in there in other units.
Other units within, you mean Unit 1.1.2,
Within
1.3?
Yeah, because
yes, absolutely.
Yes, because when I was reading it, when I was going through the material, like all those questions look very, I mean, those are all important, but those also look like you know, it's gonna be easier if we discuss more about those too.
So Sharon, I'm going to say this, and I'm not saying it to pick on you because everybody needs this lesson. This is a lesson that you didn't listen nearly as closely on Monday as you think you did. Because I said several times, and again, not saying this to pick on you, but to highlight how easy it is to miss things. I said several times, we're not covering all of Unit 1 on Monday. We're only covering Unit 1.1. We're going to come back throughout the class and go back to and do Unit 1.2.
Okay.
Come back and do Unit 1.3. Okay. And so that's why, folks, you have to zone in all the time, because you really think you're paying attention and you're not. It is so easy to miss details.
I mentioned something on Monday when I decided to just show up and enlighten you guys with my presence in the afternoon. Towards the end of the day, I said something about it's a good idea to look ahead and watch the videos of the topics that we're going to be covering in the next class. I don't know if you guys noticed, but and this is pretty awesome. I actually do it myself for the class, and I'm the instructor here. But I print out the list of classes that we're going to be covering on which day. If I was a student, I will have this handy in my binder, write them down, print them out, put them on a calendar version, however your brain works. And then you would know every day, all right, so on January 12th, we're going to cover unit 2.1 and unit 2.2. Let me go to those units in LTP and start reading ahead and start practicing. Oh, looks like on the 14th, we're going to be covering the 2.2 and 2.3. So you can always be one step ahead of the game. And I love that he gives you the outline of what we're going to cover what days. Now, granted, take it for what it's worth. Sometimes we get too excited and we talk too much and we might fall a little behind, but for the most part, we will stay on track and we will give you those topics ahead of time so that you can prepare and watch those videos. So if you notice, we are going to be covering unit 1.2, which is the continuance of license law. The 21st, I believe, is next week. So just keep an eye on that schedule. And then always know what's coming next or the next class or the next week. And then you can always look and work on the material or at least watch the videos beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Travis, I have a question.
Okay.
So on the quiz that you guys are talking about, number 8, it had to do with sole proprietor. And I've taken this class at a different place, so I knew what it was, but it wasn't necessarily something we went over.
You didn't need to go over it. A sole proprietorship is nothing that will have any sort of bearing on anything that you've covered, even in that quiz. And that's a lesson. I do that to you on purpose. I intentionally give you things because you're going to have to learn to discipline yourself. When you take the license exam, there's literally no way you're going to know every single word you see on that test. And so if you allow yourself to be railroaded by something that you're not familiar with yet, you are going to be in trouble on the test. What you have to focus on is what you do know. And here's the thing, a sole proprietorship is not a company. And so it doesn't have anything to do with anything. Because a sole proprietorship, guess what a sole proprietorship is? It's a person. And people get what kind of real estate licenses? Broker licenses. Right? They get broker licenses. A sole proprietorship is not a company. A company is an LLC, corporation, a partnership. Those get what kind of licenses? Firm. And that's really, it's a great question, Julie, but it's a distinction you simply don't need at this point. And there's a method to my madness there, because if you insist on having every scrap of information, you'll almost never get to where you need to be as a destination in this class. But to what you really need to know is you already know enough to answer a question like that, because you know if it's a company, it needs a firm license. And I know a company is something that says corporation or LLC or partnership. Those things get firm licenses.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And a lot of times you might be able to figure out, and this comes from someone whose English is not our first language, that's me. Sometimes you can make the definition from the word just by reading the rest of the question. It'll kind of help you figure that out as well, which has been a great tool for me as someone whose English is not her first language, to learn how to read the entire text of the question and fill in the blanks, and I get to the conclusion of, wait a minute, I know what that means based on the rest of the question and where they're targeting it towards. So you're not always going to know every little vocabulary word. It's just simple. I mean,
well, that's it.
Vocabulary word, period.
You never will. You just never will. Speaking of vocabulary, that's why vocabulary is such a big deal. The vocabulary words that we make a point of talking about in here, the ones that we make a point of saying, this is an important vocabulary word, we mean it. And when we say that the vocabulary that we're talking about in a particular section is a flashcard word, what that means is you really need to internalize that vocabulary. I am never going to give you an extensive vocabulary list in this class and say you need to know all these words, because it would be thousands of words. And you can't do that. But what you can do is know 100, 150 words really well. And that's what you're going to have to do. That's what you're going to have to focus on, because I can assure you, if you do that, you will know everything you need to know to answer the test questions that you're going to see on the test.
Well, and I think it
Or
sounds,
the ones that we haven't emphasized.
I think it doesn't sound realistic right now because we just got started on Monday, but just give it a couple of weeks and you're going to realize, holy cow, there's a lot. I need to prioritize what I give importance to. And you're going to hear us say throughout the class, listen, you may have a question from your test based on this topic. If you are struggling, do the Frozen song and let it go, because there will be other sections that will have a lot more questions on the exam that will come from that. If you are struggling, you will need to focus on that.
And one of the most important distinctions right out of the gate, because we're going to use these words a lot today, is understanding that transactions. Now, transaction, first of all, that's not a real estate vocabulary word, folks. That is a general English as a language vocabulary word. But if you're not familiar with it, that's okay. You better hurry up and get familiar with it. A transaction is an exchange between two people, two parties. People, parties means the same thing. Think about the sale of something. How many parties, how many people are involved in a sale?
Two.
Buyer and seller.
A buyer and a seller, right? How many people are involved in a lease?
Two.
Two. A landlord and a tenant, right? Every transaction, and those are transactions. A sale of property is a transaction. A lease of property is a transaction. A gift of property, is a transaction. Every single transaction. A transaction always has how many sides, folks?
Two.
Two. You have one side that is beginning the transaction, and you have one side that is finishing the transaction. You have the beginning and you have the end. You have the giver and you have the taker.
Mm-hmm.
And we can always identify which one is giving and which one is taking. We don't use words. Get used to this. We don't use the words buyer and seller. Very rarely do we use the words buyer and seller in real estate transactions. Very rarely do we use the words landlord and tenant in real estate transactions. Actually, the way we do it, folks, is easier. It's just going to be different. And so you have to retrain your brain. And how many different words do I have to remember to define buyer and seller? I got to remember how many words? Two words. Real estate, we ain't that smart. We can't remember two things. We can only remember one. Here's the word we're going to remember: grant. When you sell real estate, that's called a grant. Now, we're going to talk a lot about that word. You don't need to know that definition. I'm just giving it to you as an example of what we're about to talk about here. What we simply do is put OR on the end of that word or EE on the end of that word to tell you which person we're talking about. One person's going to
babies.
That's exactly right. We're like twins and we can't tell them apart. And so one is going to be the grantor and the other is going to be the grant. What?
Grantee.
The grantee. When we lease something, we don't do landlord and tenant. That's too many words. Guess how many words we use?
One.
One. We use the word lease. We have a lessor and a lessee. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
I don't need to know which is which yet. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. But what I want you to understand is this is all about simplifying terminology for us in these transactions. We're simply saying, okay, here's a transaction, and here's a way to label the people and which side of the transaction they're on. The OR person is the one starting things. They're the one getting the ball rolling. They're the one giving up something in the transaction. They're the one giving up the real estate when we're talking about these in the context of real estate, which is the context that we're using here. That's the one we really care about because this is a real estate class. So think about it this way. If you see OR on the end of a word ever in this class, are they giving up something relating to the real estate, or are they getting something relating to the real estate? If you see OR on the end of the name,
Giving up.
giving it up.
Giving up.
If you see EE on the end of the name, are they giving up something related to the real estate, or are they gaining?
Receiving.
They're gaining, they're receiving something related to the real estate. Folks, if you will just internalize that, you can instantly tell which is which in any kind of a transaction. Okay. And Jessica, look at Jessica. Jessica's got a great hint here for this. And I love it in the chat. She says something that helps her remember are the words employer and employee. Because in the employment relationship, right, who's giving up employment? The employer is. Who is getting employment?
Employee.
The employee. Does that make sense? The one who is receiving the thing we're talking about is always the EE, and the one who's giving it up is the OR person. How do we all feel about that?
So
Yeah,
Travis,
sounds good.
I wanted to mention this because, you know, some people just rather memorize things, you know, what a buyer and a seller or this or that, but you have to realize that sometimes in a transaction, roles switch, roles reverse. So memorizing those terms is not just going to help you, it might hurt you later on. So memorizing it this way as the person giving whatever it is, or the person receiving whatever it is at that moment, it's going to help you for those tricky questions where things just grow back and forth and you keep track of things as they're going.
So let's play with one. Let's see if you can apply it. Talk to me. In a rental situation, we use the word lease.
Lease.
We have a lessor and we have a lessee. Seth, yes, it's fine. Your question.
Thank you.
The landlord, what do you all think they are? Are they the one giving up the lease, or are they the one receiving the lease? Which one are they doing?
Giving up.
Giving up.
Does it make sense that we're going to give them the OR on the end of their name?
Yes.
Yes.
They are the lessor, which makes the tenant the what?
Lessee.
The
Lessee. So help me out here, folks. Give me a thumbs up. Does that make sense for you?
Yes.
And we're going to do that repetitively throughout the class. And so I've kind of given you a little bit of a list just as like a warning in advance. But like, for example, selling property or transferring ownership, we use the word grant.
And
So which one do you think is the seller, the grantor or the grantee?
Grantor.
The grant. Look at them, Leslie. Look at them, Seth. They're
applying it.
They already got it. The seller's the grantor. The buyer is the what?
Grantee.
Grantee, right?
Correct.
It's going to be that way repetitively throughout the class. So don't use those. I actually think that's one of those things where people look at that and they're like, oh, they get confused by it initially. But as soon as you accept that the OR is the person giving up something and the EE is the one receiving it, it makes it so much easier to pick up the vocabulary in this class. So much easier. Okay, good. So 2.1 specifically. Unit 2.1 specifically is really just a quick introduction of the idea of real estate. And this will be a relatively fast section that we go through. And the idea here is to come up with some basic definitions for what real estate or real property is and is not. Because the truth is, in this class, we only care about real property.
Well, that's what you're getting a license for. You're getting a license to work with real property. We don't need a license to sell a furniture, to sell personal property. You need a license to sell real property.
And even if you do need a license to sell personal property, it ain't the license we care about in this class. You know, there are licenses for a lot of things, but in this class, we only care about one professional license, and that is the license that allows you to help people with real estate services. And here's the thing, folks, big secret. We'll let you in on it. Real estate, real property, same thing.
Same thing.
They're exactly the same thing. The word real is the important word there. In fact, you can put almost anything behind the word real.
Realty,
real estate, realtor, all of those things means somebody who deals with one very important 4-letter word. And before you, because I know how your brains work, I'm gonna skip ahead and give you a hint.
Oh, darn it.
It ain't the
My brain was going
word.
to places.
I know. It ain't the 4-letter word y'all were thinking about. It's land.
Well, they might be saying that word later on in class, but that's for different reasons.
Because land, folks, is real. As a matter of fact, in the eyes of the law, land is the only real asset you can have on the planet. I want you to think about that for a second. I mean, think about the word real. That's a word we use when we try to describe something that's like concrete, right? Oh, come on, man, get real, be real. You know, we say that to people when we mean be serious, when we mean, and I'm telling you that in the eyes of the law, money doesn't matter. In the eyes of the law, stocks don't matter. In the eyes of the law, cars don't matter. In the eyes of the law, there is only one type of property in the world that is real, and that is what 4-letter word, folks? Land. And so everything we focus on in this class goes back to the land.
Well, and remember, a lot of times we reference these things as, oh, I'm buying a house. Are you really buying a house, or are you buying the land where the house happens to be on?
Bingo.
Yes.
That's exactly
just
right.
Read my mind.
We
Well, I
don't.
either read yours.
There you go. There you go. We don't sell houses, folks.
Nope, we don't. I know it sounds really crazy, Travis, to say, I don't sell houses. What do you mean you don't sell houses? Look, I sell land. The house just happens to be on the land. Yay, bonus.
That's exactly.
On that note, I was sitting there thinking, I was like, you know, Travis always like will get on to people being like, well, what are we selling? Like later on in the class. So if he goes back to that question, this is what he's trying to get you back to, or Leslie's trying to get you back to. What are you selling?
Ultimately, what's what matters? You're selling land.
At the end of the day, it's not about the house. It's not about the shopping center. It's not about the storage facility. It's not about the restaurant. It's not about what happens to be attached to the land. It's always about the land itself. That's what you're getting a license to provide people a service in. This is a land-based service.
And again, going back to real, you know, land is real. Yes, a house might be real, but can we get rid of the house? Can we bring another one in?
Sure.
Can we get rid of a car? Can we bring another one in? But can you get rid of this land and bring another one in that location? Probably not.
No,
Okay?
Mina, did you have a question?
So is the house appurtenant then in that case?
Oh,
Ooh,
you have brought a fancy word in there. We're going to talk about that word appurtenance. I'm going to let you nest on that one for just a minute. But we are, yes. The answer is yes. Yes, it is, and we're going to talk about that. But that's a great question. Kiana, is it Kiana? Is that right?
It's Kiana.
Kiana, okay.
Almost. So I just had a quick question. So what if it's a case where the person already owns land and they just want to maybe build a home on that land? Does it work differently?
That's not a real estate transaction.
Nope.
Okay.
So Kiana asked, what if somebody already owns the land and they want to build a house on the land?
They don't need us.
Here's the answer, folks. They don't need us. There is literally not a thing for us to be involved in if somebody already owns the land and they want to build something on the land. They don't need us because
they need a contractor.
Our whole existence as a real estate broker, well, that 4-letter word real simply means what, folks? Land. If they already have the land, they don't need us.
Nope.
Unless they're looking to sell it, correct?
Unless they want to sell it.
Unless they're looking to buy land, sell land, lease the land, right, to somebody else, redevelop the land by like dividing it into other pieces. They have to be actually doing something with the land and constructing something on the land. So Kiana, I'm going to try to give you an analogy to see if this helps.
Mhm.
Would you need to consult a real estate agent to build a fence in your backyard?
No.
No. And in the eyes of the law, folks, building a house, building a shopping center is the same thing as building a fence. You are simply making an attachment to land that you already own. And there's
making an improvement.
There's a fancy word. It's just called an improvement to the land. We're not involved in that.
No.
Not our function.
Yeah.
Not our function.
We only get involved when we are dealing with the actual transfer of land, however it is, temporarily, permanently. That's when we get involved.
And that's where the definition of real property really comes full circle for us. The definition of real property, which by the way, means the same thing as real estate.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, means the same thing as realty. Pretty much anything you stick on the end of that word real all means the same thing. Eddie, we're going to delete that comment, Eddie. We're going to delete that comment because that's very much do need a permit to improve in the state of North Carolina. It doesn't matter whether you're hiring someone or not. You need a permit in the state of North Carolina to install a receptacle in your own home. That requires a permit in the state of North Carolina. Now, whether you follow that law or not is your choice.
I think Eddie and my husband could be really good.
Well, listen, I get where he's coming from. I don't get a permit for a lot of things. That doesn't mean I'm not violating the law. I am a law-breaking citizen, I will tell you, because if I want to put a ceiling fan up in my bedroom, I'm putting a ceiling fan up in my bedroom. But by definition in the state of North Carolina, I just broke the law because it requires a building permit. It does. But so real estate or real property or realty is simply taking the land and adding those attachments to it. That's all it is. So that's why we refer a lot of times to saying, well, we sell houses or we sell shopping centers. What we really mean and what we really should be better disciplined about is saying we sell land that happens to have houses attached to it. I specialize. So if I sell residential real estate, what I'm really saying is I specialize in land transactions that happen to already have what type of structure on them, folks?
A house.
A house. That's all it means. But ultimately, residential real estate is no different than commercial real estate because it's
will have a house, Travis, or that will have a house.
Or that will have a house. But ultimately, at the end of the day, is there any difference between residential real estate and commercial real estate?
No.
Yeah.
Because they all rely on what? What are they all attached to?
Land.
Land. Which brings us to a really important point, folks. How many different real estate licenses do you think we have in the state of North Carolina?
Well, clearly you need one for residential, one for commercial.
We talked about there too. There's a broker.
Yeah.
One for people and one. But let's just focus on brokers' licenses. And let me ask it another way. Is there a such thing as a residential real estate license, on a commercial real estate license, on a property management license?
Not in North Carolina.
It's one license. And here's why. Because the land is the land. That's it. It's a license.
You're going deep here.
It is deep, right? But it's important. So many concepts flow from that. ultimately it's a license to help people with what kind of a transaction?
Selling land.
Real estate.
Real
estate. And don't shoehorn yourself into saying just selling. Is the license the same license when it comes to leasing land?
No.
Yes.
Yes, right? If you're going to help people with any type of a land transaction, that's where real estate licensure comes in. Everything else falls under the category of personal property. Literally everything else.
Such a short 4-letter word that just keeps getting more complex and complex and complex.
It does. Like all 4-letter words, the meaning just
but you know, it sounds like a very simple word, but it's so important for us because this 4-letter word is the foundation of our business. This is how we're going to get paid eventually. If there isn't land, you don't get paid, you don't make money. So it is very, very important to understand how much meaning this 4-letter word has to us. And if we didn't have that, we wouldn't exist. And
I will give credit where credit is due. Our mutual friend, Michelle, who's also an instructor that sometimes works with us. I think she has one of the best ways to think about the difference between real property and personal property. If you took the land and you flipped it upside down, everything that moves is personal property. If it doesn't move, it's real property, because real property is the land itself and everything that is what?
Attached to it.
Attached to the land. Personal property.
There's that fancy word that Mina used earlier, appurtenance, right?
Right, and we're going to talk about appurtenances a lot. Personal property is simply everything else. It's everything that would fall if you were able to take the land and flip it upside down. So listen, you can answer so many of your burning questions there with that very simple definition, right? You could answer so many of your questions there with that very simple definition. The basketball goal that's buried in the ground.
That's
personal property or real property?
Real property.
Real property.
Real, because if I flip
I have
that
a
land,
question on that.
Right.
fall.
If you flip it, it doesn't fall.
Go ahead, Sharon.
So I have a question. So so thinking about people, those who own a condo, let's say a person is buying a condo and that is, 2 units, for example. So
we haven't gotten to condos yet. You're about 72 steps deeper than we are.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Hold that thought. Yep. It'll be clear to you.
Right.
Okay.
And it's not that it's not a good question, but it's just we haven't even remotely gotten there yet, because condos are a very advanced idea. Right now, we're focused on the very basics of land. And so Louise asks, like, plants are real property. Well, some are. Are there plants that would fall if you flip the land upside down?
Yes. My little dead money tree that barely made it a year and a half. Oh, it'll fall.
Yeah, because it's in a what?
Pot.
It's in a pot.
Good kind.
Now, notice I did not say plants that are pot. That's different. That's, some of you got very confused when I used the word pot. That's a different type of thing. But if there are plants that are in movable planters, pots, hanging baskets, those kinds of things, those are not real property. But the ones planted in the ground, real property.
Except for crops. Oh wait, we're
gonna get there yet. We're gonna get there, right? But again, this is very basic sort of knowledge and understanding. Nina, do you have a question about that?
That's what I was going to say, just what Jessica said. How about crops?
But again,
we'll talk about that.
But again, you want to rush to like specific sort of, ooh, gotcha stuff. That's not important. What's important are the big ideas. You have to get the big ideas in place, and then we can talk about the narrow little corners of, oh, well, there's an exception here or there, right? Okay.
So Christina said, what about a manufactured home, a mobile home? Flip the land upside down.
Flip the land upside down, folks. What's a manufactured home, a mobile home, a trailer? What's it going to do if you flip the land upside down?
It's going to fall off.
It's going to fall off. And therefore, it is what kind of property? Real property or personal property?
Personal property.
Personal property. A car sitting in the driveway, flip the land upside down, what happens to the
Personal
car?
property.
Personal property.
It'll fall away. It's personal property. But you know, when you think about the driveway itself, what about the driveway?
Real property.
Real property.
Real property. Real property. That's exactly right. And so when you go to your what ifs, my challenge would be don't blurt out a what if until you've thought yourself through the process. If you've thought yourself through the process, I guarantee you can answer your own question. And that's the type of exam, is getting to a point where you can answer your own questions based on concepts rather than trying to memorize specific little gotcha moments.
And I love, like you said, I love Michelle's analogy or process behind it. If I flip the land upside down, if it falls, then it's personal property. So going back to this morning's conversation with Jessica, and I, an RV, well, to her, it's her home. To me, it's my home,
But home is a meaningless word. What matters is real property or personal property, and that RV would fall away from the land if you flip the land upside down, and therefore it's personal property.
Like Joe Dirt movie will say, home is where you make it.
That's
right?
it. It could be a tip. So, like we said, real estate, realty, it all goes back to the same meaning. It's the land plus everything that's attached to the land. And those attachments could be natural, like we talked about these trees. Luis asked about the plants, well, the ones that are planted in the ground, those are not going to fall away, right? This home, if you flip the land upside down, a lot of the contents inside the home would certainly fall away, but the home itself would do what, folks? It would stay attached. And therefore it is real property, right? The contents might fall, the rugs and the furniture and the lamps and the desks and the computers and all those kinds of things. Those are all personal property inside the home, but the actual home itself would stay attached, and therefore it is real property. And that just all means the same stuff. Real property, real estate, it all means the same thing. Don't let that be confusing. Don't let the different uses of real estate be confusing to you. That just defines really what the owner is using the land for. It's all still real estate. So at the end of the day, residential real estate is no different than commercial real estate. It's just that the owner of that real estate decided to use it for a different purpose.
So I love what you said, Travis, and you guys may have not picked up on that, but it's just going to help you when we're looking at residential versus income producing versus special use. Notice what Travis said, what the owner of the land is choosing to use it for, not the person actually using it. The owner of the land chose to do what with this property, okay?
So based on that definition, here's a question for you all. Based on that definition, could real estate change from residential real estate to income producing real estate?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
All it takes is the owner of that real estate to say, you know what? I'm going to do what? I'm going to live here. If the owner decides they're going to live there, what did that just become?
Residential.
It became residential real estate. If the owner decides that they're going to produce income with that property, it just became what?
Income producing.
Income producing.
Income producing. Now, share, and I think it's share. Is it share or shear? You'll have to let me know.
It's Cherie.
Cherie. Oh, see, option number 3 that I'd never checked. So Cherie asked, well, what about zoning requirements? Well, again, that's well past where we are, Cherie. It's not that it's not a good question. It's just that one of the reasons that people struggle in this class is they try to eat the whole elephant in one bite. You can't do that. At least in my opinion, I never could. What we have to understand is the very basic concepts, and then we start layering things on. Here's the thing. Think about a cake. I don't care how many different kinds of icing you put on a chocolate cake. If the layers are chocolate, it's still what kind of cake?
Chocolate.
It's still a chocolate cake.
Delicious.
And if you don't like chocolate, you don't want that cake. I don't care what kind of icing they put on it, right?
Listen, don't talk about chocolate cake right now. I can't have cake, okay?
You can
Same.
Can't have cake.
Well, I can have it, but I just don't want to talk about it.
Exactly.
I had chocolate cake last night.
Oh, Michelle.
The only thing wrong with having chocolate cake last night is why you didn't have chocolate cake again this morning.
Breakfast.
I have it for breakfast.
Today's your birthday, Tanya?
Oh, happy birthday!
Happy birthday.
I mean,
Happy
I mean,
birthday.
Birthday.
So does that mean that Tanya's bringing the cake today and the mimosas so we can kind of wash it down?
oh, here's the thing. I don't understand why we didn't already know that.
Right, we like to do the birthday song. How do you just have that so ready?
Seth, I don't think you really ever channeled like what it means that I was a DJ in a previous life. DJs always
I guess.
have that stuff handled.
Just think that our nickname is Dory. Has anybody watched the movie Finding Nemo?
Yes.
One of
I
the
love it.
characters, which is actually played by Ellen DeGeneres, which I love her. It's Dory, right? And you know how she easily, like, she forgets things every 5 seconds or gets easily distracted every 2 seconds. That's us. I mean, we got distracted with chocolate cake, and then magically we ended up singing "Happy Birthday"
On birthdays, exactly.
Well, and seriously, on a side note, if you've never tried Wegmans banana pudding, like, you're missing out on life, and I was too until I tried it.
Oh, see, I didn't know that. I've tried a
Holy
lot.
cow, they put cream cheese in it.
Oh, guys, stop it! I can't have any sort of carbs.
On that note, Seth, you haven't tried the Publix fruit tarts. Oh my God, they're
Ooh.
to die for.
Yeah,
I'm hungry.
A lot of things at Wegmans, but never their banana pudding. So I'll have to try that.
Oh my God, it is
Here's
so
here's my
good.
question though, and this is what now, and I love me some Wegmans. Y'all know that. I have to throw a little bit of shade. Isn't Wegmans like a New York chain? What are they doing making banana pudding? Like, okay,
I don't know, but
They're trying to fit in. They're trying to fit in here in the South, okay?
Oh,
Killing it.
I got you. Okay.
Sorry, Samantha. We were spoiled about 1.5 years, 2 years ago when Wegmans opened in
Well,
North
see, here's the
Raleigh.
thing though. Banana pudding is really just like tiramisu with Southern ingredients. It's
Yes.
all it is. I mean, it's the same thing. Instead of ladyfingers, we just put vanilla wafers in there. And instead of, like custard, we throw banana pudding in, and there you go. You have a
Call it whatever you want. I'm gonna eat it.
Exactly. Delicious. That's what
It's so
delicious.
good.
Wegmans is awesome. They really are.
We love it.
So, but
It
folks,
really is worth it. And their prices are not bad.
It is.
Anyways.
It's so important to understand that these uses, I think we get ourselves so trapped in these labels sometimes. Uses in the eye of the beholder, and the only opinion that really matters is the owner of the property. The owner of the property dictates, and that's exact. And look at Gabby's question. What a great question. She said commercial falls under income producing. Well, that's the thing. There really is no such thing as commercial real estate. There's real estate that produces income for the owner. And the truth is that could be quote unquote commercial, or it could be quote unquote residential from the outside looks of it. If I buy a house, but the only reason I buy it is to rent it out, do I have a residential property, folks, or do I have an income producing property? Which one do I have?
Income.
Income.
Producing property. Look at Cherie. She said, what about she said Airbnb. That's a great example. It may look like a house. It may smell like a house. It may act like a house. But at the end of the day, is it residential or is it income producing?
Income.
Income producing. That's exactly.
Can it be both?
Okay.
Can it be
Can
both?
it be both? Can it be both? Like, can you live in the same place that you're renting out?
Well, I think it could be in the case of something like a duplex or someone who rents out like the basement of the house they live in, then that same property could serve both functions for that owner. Sure. Because again, it's all about what the owner dictates here. It's their
What the use is
property.
for.
Our entire system of law and governance is based around land. it's a crazy concept. It's why our laws are so different than they are anywhere else in the world. I don't mean to take you down some random sort of wormhole, and I'm not going to, but I'm just going to mention this to you. The founding fathers, and we talk about those people all the time, a bunch of weird old men who with sweaty wool coats and put powder on their head. I don't know why we pay much attention to them, quite honestly. But their idea of liberty, folks, is not what we think of as liberty. Their idea of liberty was literally the free ownership of land. All of our laws are based around land. Everything that we do in this country is based around the free exercise of the ownership of land. So it is ingrained in us as a culture and a society to say, if that's my land, I get to dictate what happens there. And that's why this idea is so important to us in this class, because there's nothing that's going to dictate whether that's a residential or an income producing property other than the owner of the property themselves.
It's yours. You get to do what you want to do with it.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, does that make sense for everybody? Is that sort of clicking into place a little bit? It is sort of a redefining maybe of the way you think about real estate. So why don't we do this? I've got about 10 minutes past 10. Let's take a quick restroom break. And when we come back, we're going to jump into this bundle of rights idea here. So let's do that real quickly, because I'm sure some of you may need a restroom break. But when we come back, we want to talk about this bundle of rights that gets transferred. So why don't we come back at 10:20? That's 11 minutes, take an 11-minute break and come back at 10:20, and then we'll pick it up with the bundle of rights, okay?
Hey, Travis, just a quick question before you go.
Sure.
What's one example of a special use property?
So
A library?
Yep.
A library is a good example of a special use property. Special use is basically the owner has decided they don't want to do either of the two main things that we do with real estate. They don't want to live in it and they don't want to make money off of it.
So keep it simple, stupid, when you start thinking about the...
Right. So who owns a library in most cases?
The city.
Usually the public, right? The city, the government entity. And they've decided that that piece of land was not going to be used for residential purposes. In other words, the owner's not going to live there. And they've decided that that piece of land was also not going to be used to make money. So therefore, by default, it becomes a what kind of property?
Special use.
Special use. There you
Got
go.
it. All righty. Thank you.
I apologize. I have a question. Is it considered like a non-profitable organization?
Well, again, you're making it harder than it needs to be there, Damana. If a nonprofit organization owns land, that doesn't necessarily mean the land itself is special use land. What are they doing with the land? You have to always go back to don't make it about the owner. Make it about what the owner is doing with the land. So is, in your mind, this nonprofit that you're asking about, are they using the land to live in? Does the owner of the land live in the land?
No.
What do you, I'm asking you that question, Damani. It's your questions. I'm asking you. In your mind, you're the one that made this hypothetical up.
No, I was putting if it was a church.
Okay, but I'm saying in your mind, you want me to answer your question, but you don't want to give me the detail. It doesn't work that way. From your end. So the owner of the church, which is the church, right? The owner of the land, which is the church living in the land?
No.
So it's not residential. Is the church using the land to generate income?
No.
Then it's what kind of property? If they're not living, it's special use. There you go. That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do.
Travis, I'm gonna give another example based on that. Like, let's see if I'm right on that. So this accountant, I know he owns a property, right? But only he's not living there, but he has that house only to do business. So when people go to him to do taxes and stuff, so he's only providing services through that. So it can be an example of a service property, right? Because nobody's living there.
No. He's making what there?
Money.
So what kind of property is that?
Then income. Okay.
That's an income producing property.
Okay.
If he's conducting business and seeing clients there, he's using it to generate income.
Okay, I see. All right.
That's an income producing property.
Okay. Thank you.
So before we took our break, we talked about the definition of real estate, what real estate really is. Now, when we as people have ownership of real estate, what we actually have is a bundle of rights that are associated with the real estate. One of the most interesting things, and Seth and I talk about this a lot in class, and I think it was kind of like, it's one, he's learned to kind of geek out about weird stuff like this the more you're around it. You really can't own anything with regard to land except the land itself. All of the things that we traditionally think of as being part of owning land are actually owned by the land. These rights belong to the land. And so, like when we talk about the right of possession, which is the right to occupy the property, the owner, the person doesn't really have the right of possession. It's the land that gives up its right of possession to the owner. Now it really means the same thing, but ultimately it's kind of a cool idea to think about. These rights don't belong to us as people. They belong to the land itself. They are part of the land.
The way that I'm thinking of it right now is that these bundle of rights are kind of like at the heart of the land, and then it extends out to whoever is, occupying it.
Whoever owns it at that point in time. And so when ownership of the land changes, what also changes is that we transfer this bundle of rights from the current owner, the grantor.
There's the word.
To the new owner. And what would the new owner be called?
Grantee.
The grantee. This transfer of the bundle of rights goes from grantor to grantee. And I love the way Seth just said that in the chat. When someone says they own the land, they're really referring to what they have is they possess this bundle of rights that are associated with the land. They have all of these rights to the land. I love Robbie's fur baby, by the way, though. So cute.
So what you're saying is by owning land, I have the right to control what I do with it. I have the right to occupy it. I have the right to enjoy this land if I wanted to. I have the right to tell people to get the hell out of my property.
That's exactly right. And one of the ways that we transfer, not one of the way that we transfer this bundle of legal rights from grantor to grantee is with this document right here. This document, this legal agreement, this piece of paper, and it is a physical piece of paper, is the single most important piece of paper that exists in the United States of America, folks. It is the single most important legal document that exists. Nothing is more important than this legal document in the United States of America. A deed is the document that transfers ownership, that transfers the bundle of rights associated with a piece of real estate from one owner to the next owner. Mina, did you have a question? I can't tell if you were.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, what in the case of if you're renting the property, then what happens to those rights?
So in the case of renting the property, we're transferring limited rights in the property for a limited period of time.
So what you're saying, Travis, and I think this might help Mina, is that you don't have to transfer ownership of the property in order to transfer some of these bundles of rights.
Correct. You can transfer some of this bundle for some period of time. You can transfer some portion of this bundle for some limited period of time, but you wouldn't use a deed to do that. When you use a deed, folks,
that's permanent.
Transferring the entire bundle permanently. A deed is a very final document. Like that's where the expression comes from. You've done the deed. The deed is done. A deed is final. End of the road. Now, let's talk about two different words that we're going to use a lot throughout this class. And right from the beginning, you need to get them separate in your brain. A deed is not a contract. They are not the same document. Help me out. Which one's more important, deeds or contracts?
Deeds.
Deeds. There is no more important document than a deed. A deed is more important than a birth certificate. A deed is more important than a death certificate. A deed is the most important legal document in the United States of America. There is nothing else that is close as far as the legal weight that is associated with a deed. Contracts are not even close, but contracts are very often involved in transactions.
So I love the way Seth put it in the chat, if anybody caught it. The contract is the promise that the grantor it's making to the grantee that they will eventually at some point will transfer the bundle of rights over to them. The actual transferring part, it's the deed. The contract is just the promise to transfer.
How many of you
promises can be broken.
How many of you have ever heard the terminology under contract? We're under contract. How many of you have ever heard that terminology before?
One of my favorite phrases.
Have we actually transferred ownership, or have we just reached a point where the grantor and grantee have promised that they will transfer ownership at some point in the future?
They have promised.
They've promised. What document signifies that they have done it? What document signifies that they are finished?
The deed.
The deed. The deed is the end of the road, folks. The deed is the destination. That's the goal of any transfer of, I love dirty deeds done dirt cheap. That's great. I love it. I love me some 80s music reference. Exactly. And so, except now I have that in my head, like rattling around. I can hear him chanting that. And so when you talk about a deed is much more important than a contract. Now, here's what I'm going to point out to you. Every transfer of ownership must have a deed.
That's a good point.
Every transfer of ownership does not need a contract.
Nope.
There is no requirement that we have a contract between the grantor and the grantee, because there's no requirement.
Right now, Travis, I'm dealing with that right now. My cousin is transferring over ownership to my aunt, and there's no contract involved.
There you go.
We're transferring ownership.
There is no contract. In other words, the grantor and grantee have not made what to each other legally, folks? Promises. So could either of them change their mind without legal penalty?
No.
Yes. Because they have not what legally to each other?
Made promises.
They have not made promises. So the purpose of a contract is not to close. The purpose of a contract is to hold people accountable for promises that they have made. What is the purpose of a deed, though?
To sign the rights.
Transfer ownership.
Actually transfer ownership. Does everybody see that we can transfer ownership without a contract? Because we can simply have two parties that show up and say, let's do it right now.
Right. You and Leslie could go down to the courthouse today to transfer one of y'all's property to each other.
That's right.
Without a contract.
Without a contract. But can we transfer ownership without a deed? No. Does everybody see the difference there?
Yes. Right? So a contract without a deed is useless.
That's it. A contract without a deed is useless. A deed without a contract is still a deed. BJ, did you have a question? Your hand's up. Your virtual hand is up. If you don't, you can just shake it.
No. I think she was just talking about earlier. We can lower it for you, BJ.
We can lower it for you. I just want to make sure you didn't have a question.
I was just trying to verify what you were saying about not having the contract. So I was just repeating that.
Yep. Okay. All right, well, good. So there are going to be lots of transfers, folks.
I think Katie has a question, Travis.
Okay, where there's not
I don't know if this is a thing here, or I don't know, but maybe it's a dumb question. But like in circumstances where people like do a rent to own, I don't even know if that's a thing out here or not. Like, okay, that's basically the same thing. They would have to have a contract in the beginning, right? And then they don't get the deed signed over to them until the payments are completed.
The one way to think of it is the contract covers which part. All right, so rent to own. There's two things in there, right? The contract covers which part of that?
The promise to pay for it all.
Promise.
The rent part.
The rent part, right? I
Yeah,
promise to pay you all these payments. The deed comes when we transfer what?
Ownership.
Ownership part, right? Now, so could they do a rent to own without a contract? Sure. They could sit there and pay and pay and pay. And finally, the owner could say, you know what, I'm going to transfer ownership over to you. But there's nothing guaranteeing that they will if they didn't have a contract. As long as they have a deed, folks, they don't need a contract. But contracts without deeds don't mean anything, right? The deed is the destination. We only put contracts in place to hold people accountable that they will eventually sign what document? A deed.
That's what a contract is, guys. A contract is simply a promise. And I need you to remember this, because we're going to talk about contract law later in the class. And I need you to come back to this part, that a contract is simply a promise. That's it. Maybe one promise, maybe multiple promises, but they are just simply promises. Nothing is set in stone versus a deed. When it comes to the deed, it's all done. It's permanent, as Travis said, and there's no takesies backsies when it comes to a deed. Once it's been signed and delivered and transferred over, it's over. That's it. You can't change your mind.
Holy moly, Barbara just summed it up better than we ever could, Leslie.
Yes, there you go.
Look at what Barbara just put in the chat. She said contracts can be what, folks? Broken because they're promises. Deeds cannot, because once you have filed a deed, once you have executed a deed, it's what?
Permanent.
Over. Permanent. Ownership has been transferred. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So what are those rights in the property? The most important, by far, put this in your notes, most important. The most important right that an owner can possibly have in a piece of property is the right of disposition. Okay? Disposition means selling, disposing of the property, the right to get rid of it. Folks, if you don't have the right of disposition, you're not the owner. Simple as that. This is the one right that only the owner can have. I want you to, just a quick exercise with me. Raise your hand right now if you rent the property that you're sitting in right now. If you rent the property you're sitting in. So I see Raquel, I see Zeta, I see Eugenia, I see several of you have your hands raised, okay? So those of you that have your hands raised, those of you that rent the property you're sitting in right now, you have, so again, Vasti, look at Vasti. She's trying to differentiate things. Don't do that, Vasti. When I say the property, what am I talking about?
Land.
The land. I'm not talking about the structure you're sitting in. I'm talking about the what, folks?
Land.
The land. Don't do that to yourself. That is dangerous, slippery slope that will get you in trouble. We're always talking about the land, the land, the land.
The land.
Okay, Vasti. Well, it's not about being bad. It's about learning from it, right? Because we're redefining things for you. I get that. I was the same way at one point. So those of you that raised your hand and said you're renters, you do not have the right of disposition in that property. You can't do what with it?
Sell it.
You can't sell it because you don't what?
We don't own it.
You don't own it. You can't sell it because you don't own it. Who's the only person who can sell a property? Who's the only person that has the right of disposition?
Grantor.
The owner, which we refer to as a grantor in that property. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
The current owners have the right of disposition. They have the right to sell that property. Now, let me point this out to you, because this is going to come up as a practical application question later on in the class. So I'm going to use Vasti as an example because we made it clear that she rents the land that she's on right now. Can the current owner of that land sell the land right now, even though it is currently rented to someone?
Yes.
Yes. And the reason they can is they have the right of disposition. They have the right to sell that property at any time they choose. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Yeah, but what if it's an agreement filed at the courthouse on the property?
What if what's in an you just
let's say you and the owner have an agreement and it's filed at the courthouse.
What kind of an agreement?
An agreement where you're doing a lease to purchase. So it's like a cloudy title.
Well, then they don't have the right to sell it because they've already agreed to do what with you?
Right, to sell it to you.
You just put a whole, that's like saying, I asked you what was the name of the horse, and you're like, well, what if they're riding a donkey? It's two different things.
Right. Okay.
Right? It's two different things.
Right.
But in most cases, a renter has no right to stop an owner from selling because the owner has the right of what, folks?
Disposition.
Now, here's why that's important. The owner can sell, but does the tenant have a right, like say the right of enjoyment? Yes. Even though that's normally a right associated with ownership, if you take Vasti as an example, Vasti, sorry, I remember now from Monday. If you take Vasti as an example, if you take her example, the owner transferred that right of enjoyment to Vasti through the lease. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes. Yes.
Right? The owner also transferred that right of exclusion to Vasti through the lease. So Vasti has the right to tell other people they cannot do what?
Enter the property.
Cannot be on the property. She has the right to say who can and who cannot be on the property. Does Vasti have the right of possession on that property, the right to be there herself and to tell others they can be there on that land? Yes. Now keep in mind, all of these rights are normally associated with ownership, but the owner decided to transfer them to Vasti for a limited period of time. Correct?
Correct.
In that lease. Here's my question. And one more that the owner has transferred to Vasti during that period of time is probably the right of control. Does the owner still have the right of disposition during all this? While all this is going on, while Vasti's maintaining the property, using the property, enjoying the property, does the owner still have the right of disposition?
Yes.
Yes. Does the owner have the right of possession while Vasti is leasing that property?
No.
Does the owner have the right of enjoyment while Vasti is leasing that property?
No.
So can the owner sell the property right now, today?
Yes.
Yes. And when they do, they will transfer the bundle of legal rights to the new purchaser. Does everybody agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you transfer what you don't have?
No.
No. So here's my question. The new owner, what rights would they have in the property tomorrow if they were to purchase that land today that Vasti has a lease on? What rights would the new owner have in that property tomorrow?
Disposition.
The right of disposition. That's it.
Good job.
Only the right of disposition, because that's the only right that the current owner has to transfer. Does that make sense for everybody?
You can only transfer what you own.
Who has all the other rights right now?
Lessee.
Vasti does. And Vasti will continue to have all those rights until what agreement comes to an end?
Until
Until that lease comes to an end. And at that time, will Vasti lose her rights in the land?
Yes.
Yes. And they will return to the land. And who owns the land at that point in time? The old owner that Vasti leased from, or the new owner that has now purchased the land?
New owner.
New owner. That's a very long way to say this, folks. If I go out today and I show a house to somebody who's looking, they want first-time home buyers and they're ready to move in, and they look at a house that's leased for the next 8 months and they make an offer on it to buy it, when can they move in?
After the lease is up.
In 8 months. Can they tell that tenant to get out after they buy the house next month?
No.
Because those rights have been transferred. Matthew asked, can it be negotiated which rights can be transferred to a tenant? Absolutely. And that's why written leases are an important thing. You know, to what extent we're transferring those rights, right? So think about it. We don't transfer the right of possession without limitations. We talk about who can be in the property in a written lease. We talk about how long we're transferring these rights. We talk about under what circumstances. Yes, Alyssa, this is nationwide. This is how property rights function. Absolutely. Absolutely. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
Hey, Travis, when you have like rental properties, you have a limited exclusionary right if you want to come on and inspect the properties, correct?
Well,
is that the right way to say that?
Only if your lease specifies that. So here's what Mark is asking, I believe. Does the owner of the property have the right to come on and inspect the property? Not unless they put that in writing, because
not automatically, because they just transfer those rights over to the tenants.
Right.
I mean, it's not.
So it has to be in the lease that every 30 days we're going to come on the property and
that's
there
exactly,
you go, Mark.
Mark, there is a very fancy legal terminology for an owner who does not have in the lease that they have the right to inspect the property, but comes on the property to do an inspection. It's a very fancy legal terminology called breaking and entering.
So, sorry, question. Would it be is the same as if somebody's renting an apartment, like for maintenance people, when they come in to do
They
work?
don't have that right unless what is specified in what legal document that's governing the transfer.
Right.
That's exactly right.
And that would be in your best interest to do that, because otherwise.
So there was there was an incident a couple of years ago with my brother-in-law and his girlfriend. They had more than the specified people living where they were living at, and somebody pretty much snitched on them. And so like the owner literally breaks in like their house and comes in and tells them that they have to get out because they have too many people living there. And she found out, but she literally broke in.
Did they call the police?
No, she said that was her right.
No, I don't care what they say. Let me ask you a question. If somebody busts in your front door tonight and says they have the right to be there, you going to listen, or you be like, asshole, I'm dialing 911 right now.
Yep.
I don't care who you are. You know, folks, this is what, and again, this is where I have to go back. I am not here to teach you what Joe Blow is going to do on the street corner. Are there landlords in North Carolina that clearly don't know the law?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Was that landlord absolutely guilty of felony breaking and entering in that property, even though they're the owner of that property?
Yes.
And if your sister, even though your sister was in violation of the lease, even if your sister had dialed 911 and said, I admit I am violating the lease, but this woman has busted in my house, that landlord is going to jail. They are guilty of felony breaking and entering, no different than if they had broke into some random house down the street that they don't own. It is the same legal idea because they don't have the right to be there. They transferred that right to who?
To the tenant.
The grantee.
To the grant, to the lessee. Not grantee, because it's not a sale, to the lessee. Okay. Vasti, did you have a question or did we get you covered? Your hands up.
Yeah, because sorry, I didn't. It's still up. I'm sorry. Yeah. No, I was just saying. I was like, yeah, that was very weird. She tried to do that to my house too. And it wasn't even hers. It was under my trailer was under my name, and she tried to do that once. And I told her, if you ever come into my house, I'm definitely calling the cops.
Vasti, you keep wanting to be about the house. She was breaking and entering the minute she set foot where?
On your property.
On the land. It's about the what?
The land.
The land. The minute they set foot on the land, they are violating the law.
One of the worst mistakes that you guys can do in this class is try to relate to what life stories or life situations you have dealt with in the past. And for two reasons. One of them, we all put different definitions on things as we hear them, as we see people do. And also, I forgot the second one, but either way,
here's the truth, Leslie. 90% of us have already broken the law today. In some way, shape, or form, 90% of us.
For yourself, I'm a law obedient.
I broke the law this morning. I crossed the street 3 times walking the dogs, and I didn't use a crosswalk in any of them.
Shame on you.
I do it willingly.
But here's what you need to understand. Are we being tested on whether or not Travis is going to get arrested for crossing at a non-crosswalk? Or are we testing on, is it illegal to cross at a non-crosswalk?
If it's legal.
And that's what you have to break in your brain. We're not testing you on what happens in the real world with these people. We're testing you on what the law says about these situations.
So that's why you always apply the rule to it. And if it doesn't make sense, then it's illegal. It's wrong.
Right. And Barbara, we're not even talking about the ethical aspect of it. That's another thing that's tough for people to understand. You could read all of the real estate license law in North Carolina. You know what word never shows up one time?
Ethical.
Ethical. Ethics. Any root of that word never shows up one time. They don't care if you're ethical. They care if you're legal. That's it. In fact, if you call the real estate commission and say, well, do you think this is ethical? They're said, that's not our job. Our job is to make sure they're following the law. They could be the biggest scumbag on earth and we don't care. That's not our job.
Yep.
It's not what they're there to enforce, according to the state of North Carolina. They're there to enforce the law. And sometimes the law is ugly.
Pearl says we have no morals. How dare you?
Well, I mean, but I'm telling you, that's a big part of getting the questions right in this class, is getting to that point. You know, it really is. Okay. Now, that brings us, why do we have that big long discussion? Because it brings us to a very important word. And it's a word that was already brought up once. And I said, just nest on it for a few minutes and we'll come back around to it. The word appurtenance. Yes, you can, Samantha. Appurtenances.
Trust me, Samantha, if I can say it, you can say it. It took me a minute.
Exactly. Appurtenances. Appurtenances are anything that are attached to the property, to the land, and they can be physical things that are attached to the property. So think about, again, if we turn the land upside down, things that would stay attached are what?
Real.
Personal property.
Things that would stay attached or what
Never attached.
Real
property. And if they're attached, they're also appurtenant. Appurtenant means attached. So this house that I'm sitting in, is it an appurtenance on this piece of land? I think that was the question specifically that was asked.
Yes.
It is. But appurtenances go further than that. And this is why it's such a tough idea, I think, for people to wrap their brains around. Physical appurtenances are easy to understand because you can see them, you can touch them, you can feel them. But the biggest category of appurtenances are things that we can't touch and see. They are legal ideas, folks.
By the way, this word appurtenance is going to haunt you for the rest of your career. So you better learn it. You better make peace with it.
All these rights that we talked about, they are appurtenant to the land.
And
In other words, these rights don't belong to the owner of the land. They belong to what?
The land.
The land itself. If you have the right of possession in a piece of land, what you have is the right of possession for a limited period of time, as long as you own the land, as long as you lease the land, because ultimately the right of possession actually belongs to the what?
The land.
The
The
land.
land. And appurtenances are anything that has been legally tied to the land. Eddie said, think about it as benefits of the land. That's a great way you can think about it, but it also goes the other way. One of my grandfather's favorite expressions, and I picked up a lot of them. Son, I can hear him say it right now. Every time I complained about something, son, the fleas come with the dog.
Yep.
Every time I whined about something, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, son, the fleas come with the dog. I remember I got a car and my mom told me, if you think I'm gonna pay for insurance on it or put gas in it, it will sit in the yard. And I remember telling him, I'm like, I gotta go to work. Ugh, I gotta make my insurance payment this week. And son, the fleas come with the dog. I can hear him right now saying it. That was his way of saying you got to take the bad things with the what?
With the good ones.
With the good.
It's a package deal.
And it is a package deal. And appurtenances, folks, are often good, like these rights that we've talked about, but often appurtenances are not good. Often appurtenances are restrictions that have been attached to the land. Jennifer said like a spouse.
Hey, Jennifer, you're just
like the HOA.
Somebody said like an HOA. An HOA is a good example of an appurtenance, right? And so easement, great example of appurtenances. Zoning. How many of you live in a city that has zoning rules that say what you can and cannot do with the property? Those rules are appurtenant to the land.
So what you're saying, Travis, is that no matter who owns that property and how many times it's transferred over, those rules, those appurtenances, those benefits will remain with the land regardless of who owns it.
That is exactly right. That's exactly it. It doesn't matter who owns the property at any given time. The restrictions, the rights, the privileges, the good things, the bad things, all of them are part of the land itself. And what that means, folks, is when you hear me or Leslie or Seth throughout this class say, such and such is appurtenant to the property, immediately in your brain, a red light should start to flash. Ding, ding, ding. If it's appurtenant to the property, how long is it going to be relevant to the property?
Forever. Forever and ever.
Ever. In the vast majority of cases, it's going to be relevant to the property forever, which means it doesn't just impact the current owner, it impacts every future owner who will own that property. Are there appurtenances that would have been attached to this land that my house sits on right now 100 years ago, 200 years ago?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. And yes, Alyssa, it does include easements. Easements are examples of appurtenances.
But what if I don't like him, Travis? What if I don't like those rules?
Then you had one opportunity to express your displeasure, not by the property. Because when you took ownership of the property, what's Granddaddy's favorite expression?
You got the fleas with the dog.
Please
And
come
there
with the
ain't
dog.
no shampoo for it.
That's exactly right. You can't put no shampoo on it to get rid of that. The fleas come with the dog. They're stuck there, right? And they stay there. So a lot of you are asking questions about how do you find appurtenances that were made a long time ago. It takes research and a lot of what, so don't let your mind run away with that yet until we talk about what they are, because trust me, this is a building block process. I mean, there are processes to research these things, because now at least you've seen. I love Jessica's question for this reason. She said, how do we find appurtenances that was made 10 owners ago? She's immediately seen, I need to know about the appurtenances.
That's important.
Because they're still important right now.
Because she's going to have to deal with those as the current owner of that property. Those are her fleas.
Exactly right.
Have to put up with them. So she's connecting the importance of knowing what they are. I like that.
Yep. Cherie, you had a question?
Yes. So can you have a situation where you buy the property and something is discovered later and then it becomes a situation where it's retroactive? So you purchased it without this situation, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead, but now this is new.
You didn't purchase it without this situation. You purchased it dumb and blindfolded. You purchased it without because Cherie, there is a vast difference between the restriction not being there and you not knowing the restriction was there. So
different thing. What if it was like, let's say a mineral or something that wasn't discovered initially and it was discovered after the fact?
What mineral you think we're gonna like?
I don't know.
Here again,
no.
you're way off into the sunset somewhere. It doesn't matter. If you own the land, do you have the right to all the minerals that are on the land?
Yep.
What do y'all think?
Yes, you do.
Yes, you do. So it doesn't matter if it's been discovered or not been discovered or whatever. When you buy the land, everything that is part of that land, right? Everything is part of that transfer, and it is so therefore it falls to who in the transaction. Now keep in mind, we have not even introduced the idea of real estate brokers into this thing yet. We are chapters away from that. There are only two parties involved in these transactions. There's a grantor and a grantee. Who do you think is going to bear the legal responsibility of finding out what is and is not appurtenant to this property as part of that transfer?
There we go.
Don't dare say a real estate broker, because we haven't even talked about that yet.
Which answers Jessica's question. She was like, what if the realtor or previous owner didn't disclose all this? Public knowledge.
So Seth just repeated a question, said, what if I didn't know? What if? I'm gonna give you another one of my granddaddy's favorite expressions, and I don't say this one as often. He said, you see that stuff out there on the highway? What do they call that stuff? And I'd say, you talking about the road? He said, yeah. He said, what do they call that stuff out there? I said, asphalt. He said, yeah, your ass and your fault. That's exactly what we say when you buy a property and you don't know about these appurtenances, because a deed is what?
Final.
Final. It's permanent. And so it is so ultra important for the grantee to do their homework. And I know you want to run off to the races, but you have to understand, we are in a very incremental building block process. Here's what you should start to see, folks. If we place all this responsibility on the grantee, how many buyers do you think are equipped to do this for themselves?
Not a lot.
Not a lot. Oh gosh, it's almost like it would be nice if there was a profession where we trained people to know this stuff so that people could get professional help with evaluate. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if there was such a profession like that?
It would be awesome. It will help them so much.
Folks, we have to build you through the process of why our profession exists. And our profession exists because this is complicated. And who's taking all this risk in the transaction? Is it the seller, grantor, or is it the buyer, grantee that's taking all this risk?
Grantee.
Buyer grantee.
It's the buyer grantee, because it's too late once that deed is done. Once the deed is done, folks, once ownership has been transferred, the grantor is like, I don't know, I had to deal with it. It's the same shit that was attached to the property when I owned it. So I had to figure it out for myself. You figure it out for yourself. That's literally what the law says. verbatim.
I'm going through that myself right now.
If you look up like North Carolina General Statute 101, it says like it's same shit, just transfers to the next owner. I think that's the exact wording of the law.
Sure, they did.
No, what was your comment, Robbie? I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying I'm kind of going through that on a different level with the land lines. The land hadn't been surveyed in a while, so it's 3 acres here. But when you look at the land deed, it says like what marks the property line is an oak tree that, and this is from 1970 something. This land deed was made, and I walk out there and I don't see an oak or a big rock in this particular spot anymore, years and years later. So
let me ask you a question, Robbie. When did you notice that you couldn't find these markers? Was it before you bought the property and you said, hey, I don't know where these lines are? Or was it after you had already bought the property?
That's what I'm saying, after now. So we're trying to backtrack and, get with a surveyor to come out and, redo the lines.
There it is, folks. I love that Robbie shared this. He just told you the whole purpose of our profession right there in one nutshell. What is our job? To be there in our client's ear and say, you don't want to find this out when?
After the fact.
Later.
After the fact. It's too late for us to do anything about it. So when should a surveyor have been brought in to establish the exact location of those property lines?
Before
the close.
Before the deed was done.
Before the purchase.
Before that deed happened. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is such a big sort of idea to come to grips with. That's why our job exists. Our job is not to be attorneys or be surveyors, but our job is sure to say, you know what, if I was you, I would have a surveyor map that out for you before you close, because you want to know exactly where the lot lines are.
And this is very practical, and I don't give you a lot of practical stuff in this class, but I always think about it this way. When I'm involved in a transaction, my job is to be 2 or 3 steps ahead of this situation. Where is my client going to find themselves in a month, in a year, in 10 years, so that I can get to that and hopefully prevent any of those bumps.
Anticipate and prevent, right? Anticipate the problems and prevent them from ever happening. It's exactly right. Barbara, you had a question?
Yes, I was wondering if I sold my mineral rights to my land and then I sold my land to someone else, do the mineral rights go back to the land when selling, or is it still?
Again, those are appurtenances, so those are permanent. What you end up now with is the rights are separated to 2 different owners. You have all these rights belong to the property owner, but the separate mineral right belongs to a separate owner that's out here. And every owner from now to the end of time would have to honor that. Becomes permanent to the property. That's what we mean by appurtenances. So these are dangerous, folks. These are absolutely dangerous if owners are not aware of them, because they need to be aware of them. Is that making sense for everybody? Okay.
So I have a really quick question. So mineral rights, right? So I own the land, I sell the mineral rights. I'm basically saying that whoever owns those mineral rights, if they want to come on and look for oil on my land, can.
Correct. And not just on the land as long as it's your land, but on the land from now till the end of time.
Wow.
So
every future, you're making that decision not only for yourself, but for every future owner of that real estate. And here's what you need to understand, Mark. Is that going to limit who would be willing to purchase that real estate from you? Is that something that's going to be taken into account when you start trying to sell that land to somebody down the road and they realize they have to honor that restriction?
Am I legally responsible to disclose that when I sell the property?
As a seller, you are not. As a seller, you are not.
Okay.
So sellers, again, we put all the responsibility on who? The grantor or the grantee?
Grantee.
The grantee. Mina, you had a question?
Yeah, so in that case, like let's say, like what Mark said, if you find minerals or oil, whatever, would the company who's buying the mineral, can buy your land if they want, like from you, if
Sure,
you
they
agree,
can, I
obviously.
mean, yeah, I mean, there's nothing that's going to prevent them if they want to come back and buy the land as well, they could.
Okay.
But they would have to negotiate that deal just like any other purchaser would.
Okay.
Otherwise, they already have the right to the minerals. If that's all they want, that's probably all they're ever going to. Why would they need the land? If the only reason they want the land is for the minerals, and they were able to negotiate the mineral rights, and folks, you run into this a lot, especially in rural parts of Eastern North Carolina. Here's what you're going to find: somebody's mama just died, and they inherited the farm, and they want to sell the farm, but the timber cutting rights belong to Weyerhaeuser. And because my great granddaddy sold the timber cutting rights to Weyerhaeuser in 1945 for $3,000. Folks, right now there's 200 acres of timber on this farm that's probably worth $1 million by itself. Do any of those trees belong to the property owner?
No.
None. And will they belong to the next property owner if they sell it?
No.
And is that going to create a huge difficulty in selling that land when purchasers find out, oh yeah, you're buying all this acreage, but this company called Weyerhaeuser has the right from now till the end of time to come in here and plant trees, cut them down, plant trees, cut them down, plant trees, cut them down, and you can't do anything else with it because they have that right.
Problematic.
Now, could the Weyerhaeuser, I have a question. Could the Weyerhaeuser sell off their rights again?
Sure.
Like, I know you said
they could sell the mineral rights to Georgia Pacific. They could sell it to some other company, and that because once it's you can always sell what you own. If they own the mineral rights, they can sell them.
What else extends into mineral rights? Say it was like
it could be underground mineral rights. It could be the rights to water.
What about historical artifacts or something like that? Is that
anything? I mean, it literally depends on how the right transfer was written. I mean, some of them just say anything below ground, which literally means anything.
Anything.
Okay.
You know, how do you all think? How many of you have ever heard of like fracking as a method of natural gas exploration?
Mm-hmm.
Well, do you think the natural gas companies come in and buy the land, or they simply buy the mineral rights to that land?
Just the rights.
They buy the mineral rights. That's all they want, the stuff below ground. But that becomes appurtenant to the property for how long?
Forever.
Forever. Folks, are you starting to understand how important this word appurtenance is?
Yes.
Very. 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 If deed is the most important word in all of our legal system, appurtenance might be number 2. Eugenia just got a question. What's up, Eugenia?
Okay, so I hear you say that it's not on the seller or the grantor to disclose information or appurtenances that come with the land. It's on the grantee.
Yep.
But as the grantee, they hire us to.
Don't bring us into the picture yet. We haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
Because I'm promising you, it's going to confuse you if you start trying to layer on things that we haven't even talked about. It really will. It's not that it's a bad question. It's just way out ahead of us at this point in time.
Could I piggyback off that question?
Sure.
Could the owner get in trouble for not disclosing the information?
No, because the owner, the grantor, has no responsibility to disclose. When I say all the responsibility rests with the grantee, folks, the grantor has zero responsibility. Could the grantor sell you this property knowing that they've sold the timber cutting rights to Weyerhaeuser or Georgia Pacific and never mention it to a buyer?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. And would the buyer have any recourse at all against that seller?
No.
No, because the seller's not under any obligation to do that.
Remember what we said earlier about ethical, and we don't give a damn about ethical?
We're here to teach you the law. And just because you don't like the law, doesn't mean you get to change it. I don't like that that's the law either, but it is the law. Who is all of this responsibility on, folks?
The grantee.
The grantee. And yes, Louise, and so Louise brings us to, and I know I've got Cherie and Kiana with questions there. Cherie, I'm sorry, Louise brings us to, isn't it public records? Yes. Almost anything that is going to be considered appurtenant to a property, to a piece of land, is going to be considered a publicly available record. It's going to be required by law that it be publicly available, that you can see it publicly. Okay. And Alyssa asked, so when seller puts out their disclosures upon listing, they can intentionally exclude this. Sellers don't even have to write a disclosure. Stop it. See, that's the thing. You're so caught. You just don't want to accept the reality. The seller don't have to do shit but take your money and die. That's it. Accept it. Put it in your brain. Put it in your soul. Write it on your heart. What responsibility does a grantor have in the state of North Carolina to disclose anything about their property?
No responsibility at all.
As Granddaddy said, the stuff on the road, asphalt, baby, your ass and your fault. If you bought that property and you didn't know about this, it is your fault. You don't have to like that. I don't like it, but it is the law. That's what the law says. Kiana, what was your question?
So I just had a quick question. It's kind of like in the ballpark of what we've been talking about as far as an owner. But so a few years ago, my mother-in-law purchased a home in Virginia. And after purchasing the home, I guess like a few months later.
Again, you said something right there that I have to cut you off.
Mm-hmm.
In Virginia, property law varies a lot from state to state.
Well, it's kind of a general question.
Okay, all right.
As well. So there was the previous owners showed up at her door one day, and basically they had illegally buried someone in her now backyard. I don't know whatever happened with the situation, but they were coming by because they were asking if they let her know, because this wasn't documented. It wasn't something that she even knew about, if they could still come and like visit, I guess, where they had buried that person. What would you do in a situation like that? I know it's rare, but
I mean,
plant roses.
What would I do? I mean, I'd be like, well, they belong to me now. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. They're appurtenant to the land. So
Praveen said it's my grandma now.
I'd probably charge them rent. Be like, well, y'all, I mean, you know, like y'all want to come see her, I charge you a fee. There's a toll.
But since it was done illegally, can you actually have that body removed from your property?
Well, but that gets into whole things beyond property law. That has nothing to do with real estate law. That has to do with all kinds of public health laws.
Okay, gotcha.
That simply see if they buried them with their Rolex. I love that. Sure. And the answer is no, they wouldn't have forgot they were out there if they did that. I can assure you that. Cherie?
Yeah, so going back to if you sold your mineral rights or someone else sold it and you purchased the property, if someone wants to access that mineral, do they have, even though they own the mineral, do they have the right to break ground or break the surface of the land?
That depends on the transfer. You're asking me a general question that there is no general answer for. It depends on the specifics. That's why you'd have to, if you were buying that property, sure, you'd have to go back and look at specifically what does this agreement state. Not do they have the rights to the minerals? Do they also have the right to access the property to get to those minerals? You'd have to go back and look. That's going to be a very specific case by case thing. There's no automatic when it comes to that. Okay. I did say they were pertinent to the land, Heather. Exactly. Okay.
And Travis, where would we actually go to find out what the mineral rights for a certain piece of land is? I know the courthouse, but where in the courthouse?
So you go to the Register of Deeds office, because the transfer of ownership rights and property always happen with what document, folks?
The deed. It's all listed in there.
And but here's the thing, and this is what you need to understand, and we're going to talk about this. One deed is not enough. There's not one deed to a property. We're going to talk about that. Every time the property is transferred, there's a new what?
Deed.
So how many deeds would you have to review to see all of the potential restrictions?
All of them.
All of them on that property. Every time that property has had a deed recorded or filed, you need to look at that if you're purchasing that property.
Because if, let's just say that restriction or whatever it is that we're talking about was placed the very first time that a grantor transfer ownership. Well, the property sold or transfer over 5-10 times after that. We don't make mention of that every single time it's transferred because remember, a grantor can only transfer what they own, right? So they're just transferring over what they own. Whatever happened before them, that's before. So we will need to go back to every single one of those transfers to see what is the whole story so that we know exactly what we need to get or what we're getting.
Somebody asked a question of what is a restrictive covenant? And this is pay attention. A covenant is not an HOA. Say it out loud. Repeat after me. A covenant is not an HOA.
A covenant is not HOA.
I'm going to try to give you an analogy. No fighting in the bar. Is that a rule? Or is that the bouncer who's going to throw you out the door if you fight in the bar? Which one is it?
The bouncer.
No.
No, it's a rule.
No fighting in the bar. Is that a rule or is that the bouncer that's going to throw you out the door?
It's the rule. So.
It's the rule. It's the rule. The bouncer's job is to do what?
Enforce
it. Enforce the rule. Yes. Folks, restrictive covenants are the rules that have been attached to the property. An HOA is not a rule. An HOA is the what?
Enforcer.
The bouncer, the enforcement. Okay. An HOA is simply someone who has been created or hired to enforce the rules. So is this an HOA or is this a covenant? You can't have your trash can out on days when trash is not being picked up. Is that a covenant or is that an
Covenant?
HOA?
HOA.
The rule, covenant.
The covenant.
Covenant. That's a rule. Somebody put a letter on your mailbox that says they're going to start fining you $200 a day if you don't remove your trash can. Is that a covenant or is that an HOA? HOA, because that's the enforcement of the rule. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yep.
So covenants are simply rules that have been attached to the land. And by the way, they are appurtenant to the land. So how long are those covenants, those rules
forever
to be enforceable?
Forever.
Forever. Forever. And does it change just because ownership of the land changes?
No.
That's the whole point of it being pertinent. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Appurtenances run with the land. They stay with the land. That means when ownership changes, the appurtenances go with it. So
I have a question.
Okay.
How does poor enforcement by the HOA affect or play a role when it comes down to, you know, in the legal system? Like, say they're going to court for violating this, but the HOA is selective with enforcement.
That's up to the court of law to decide. I'm not a court of law.
Okay, because I was going to say, I mean, if we're talking about like the rule, I thought the rule would supersede the enforcement.
Well, and I think if you wanted the rule enforced, wouldn't that be the argument you would make?
Sorry, my phone started ringing and I got sidetracked. Say that one more time.
If you wanted the rule enforced, wouldn't that be the argument you would make, that the rule is the rule?
But we're talking about.
Don't you butt me. Answer my question and I'll answer yours. This is a fair back and forth. Okay. If you were making the argument that the rule should be enforced, wouldn't you say the rule is the rule?
Yes.
And where would you make that argument?
Court.
In court.
I told you I wasn't what? You can only go one place to get that sort of argument decided. Where?
Court.
To court.
Yes.
You would be saying to a judge, the rule is the rule. They're not enforcing the rule. Make them do what?
Enforce the rule.
Enforce it.
Enforce the rule. It really is as simple as that. We make this idea of HOAs so overly complex. Folks, the HOA is you. It's the other owners in the neighborhood.
You guys are giving HOAs way more credit than they deserve.
The HOA is your neighbors. That's it. That's all it is. And if your neighbors are not enforcing the rule, then you go to court and you say, the rule is the rule. And you ask a judge to do what?
Enforce it.
Enforce the rule. That's it.
But Travis, when you choose those members for for the HOA, they are extremely biased. Who gets what?
Well, maybe they are, but again, that's you. It's on you. Blame yourself. You're the one. You're the HOA. And Cherie, you could. I'm sorry, I got to call you. You said you could vote to change the rules. Like hell, you can. No, you cannot, because the rules are what?
Appurtenant.
Appurtenant. And they are attached to the land for how long?
Ever.
Ever. The only way. Now hold on. The only way those rules can be changed is if the person who put them in place in the beginning said they could be what? Changed.
Altered or changed.
What is the one? I'm a history buff. What's the most genius part of the Constitution of the United States? And don't you dare say freedom and liberty and all that jibberty jabberty nonsense. What is the one thing that makes the Constitution of the United States different than every other legal document ever created to govern on this planet?
Freedom of speech.
No.
Freedom of land ownership.
It was written with the understanding that it was going to need to be what? Changed. They wrote into the original document a method to do what with it?
To change it.
Amend it.
Change it. And folks, covenants work the same way. Whoever put those covenants there, some owner in the past, if they didn't leave a method for them to be changed, what's the method for changing them?
There isn't one.
There isn't one. There isn't one. So if you want to buy in a community and you think, okay, what does it change? What does it take to change the covenants? You got to look at the covenants themselves and see if they have a method to be changed. Some do and some don't.
Okay.
Or you could alternatively buy a home in a community that doesn't have any what? Don't you say HOA, because HOA doesn't matter. It's just the enforcement.
Covenants.
That doesn't have covenants on the property. Cherie, did you still have a question or is your hand just up?
No, I think you answered it, because we had a situation in our previous community where there were too many renters. And so we were voting to decide what percentage of the community could be rented. But I guess in that case, it was written into the covenants that it could be amended.
That it could be amended. There you go. And as long as that original set of covenants gives that right, then it can happen. But if it doesn't, there's no changing. There's no. Okay. Samantha said, my neighborhood is old. What if the developer who made the appurtenances is dead? Most of them are. The appurtenances have nothing to do with the person who attached them. They are attached to the what?
Land.
The land. And the land is going to last how long, folks?
Forever.
This is the point of the class where we've reached the juncture of you don't like the answers that Travis is giving you, so you're trying to find a way that those aren't the right answers. These are the right answers.
Been there, done that.
These restrictions last forever. If you have a buyer who says, I love that house. Oh my God, I love everything about it. But the rules are just crazy. What should they do?
Go somewhere else.
Go somewhere else. That's the only answer, because the fleas come with the dog.
Mm-hmm.
It's the way it works. It's the way it works. How many of you now think that somebody better be going to the courthouse and doing a heck of a lot of research when they buy a piece of property?
Heck yeah.
It's important.
Those W-2 employees that we need.
Now, keep in mind at this point, we're still saying this is a responsibility of the grantee. We're not talking about anybody else at this point in time. Over time, obviously, we're going to add in layers to this. Who do you think the first people that the first line of defense would be? These are all legal matters. What's the first line of defense if people are concerned about these things? Go to who?
Attorney.
An attorney. These are legal matters. That's exactly right. Go to an attorney. Try to get their advice about these kinds of things. So one of the most important questions that we have to answer in any transaction is what things are included in the transaction and what things are not included in the transaction. So here's what I want to do real quickly. Let's take a quick restroom break. I got 11:33. Let's come back at 11:40. That's 7 minutes. Come back at 11:40 and we will pick this up. And what we're going to talk about is deciding what things are going to be considered fixtures or versus personal property. Okay. So I wanted to start the recording back, Eddie, because your question is a great question. Eddie's question was, we're talking about restrictions or appurtenances that are already on the property and how those affect the property. But could the current owner place new restrictions, new appurtenances, new rules? And he gave an example of, going forward, I'm going to receive a certain percentage of the sales price every time this property is sold. Sure. Yes. The current owner of a parcel of land, parcel just means piece or lot. The current owner of land can place any additional restrictions that they would like to see on the property because it is their property. But here's the key thing to remember about that. They're not just placing those restrictions for themselves. They're placing them for every subsequent owner of that property moving forward in the future, because those I just used the word, those restrictions, those new sort of rules become what? What's our magic word?
Pertinent.
Pertinent to the property from now until the end of time. And so, Eddie, to answer your question is resoundingly, yes, the current owner could do that. My guess, however, is that that might limit their ability to sell the property because a buyer would be looking at that going, okay, well, I'm okay paying you, but so now when I sell it down the road, I got to find you again to pay you again. And is the next buyer going to be okay with that? So it might really limit your marketability of the property.
Yep.
Yeah. And so
it's legal.
And that's always sort of kind of what we hope is the balance with placing these restrictions, is that owners will sort of tame themselves a little bit from placing so many ridiculous restrictions against property because of the inevitable reality that it does limit who you can sell the property to, because people that do their research are going to say, now, wait a minute, I don't want to follow these rules. Rose, you had a question?
So is it safe to say that the developers actually write the restrictive covenants and not the builder?
Well, builder developer largely means the same thing in most cases, but if they are separate, the developer, it's whoever owns the land is the best way to answer your question. It's the landowner. And so it could be anybody that owns the land at any period, at any point in time. And remember, the land, and this is another hang up that people have in this class, and it's understandable. We tend to think of, I've had people say, well, I don't have to look back in time. My house is new construction. It ain't about your house. Your house might be new construction, but that land is not new construction, folks. It's been here a while, you know, and ownership of that land has been going on for hundreds of years before you took ownership of the property. And any restrictions that were placed in 1842, guess what? They're still there
now.
Travis, what would supersede like city ordinances? I know I lived in Cary for a few years, and it was like all types of city ordinances that I wasn't familiar with. So what would supersede the city ordinance or an appurtenance?
There is no superseding. You have to follow all of them. So when there are appurtenances on a property, and there are also city rules or ordinances, which are separate than the appurtenances because they've been placed by some government body, you have to follow both, and so sometimes that really does limit the usefulness of the property, because if they're, if wherever they overlap or wherever they conflict, you have to follow all the rules. You can't violate the appurtenances to satisfy the ordinances, and you can't violate the ordinances to satisfy the appurtenances. You have to follow both.
Travis, as a practical rule, these usually apply these covenants to, like, if you sell your house and it's amongst like family members or family land, saying that you can't turn this into maybe a mobile home park or something like that. I mean, most people don't give a crap what you do with it once you sell it, right?
Most don't, but developers, to go back to sort of Rose's question, developers do care. And the reason developers care is not because they actually care what happens in the future. Let me tell you what developers care about. If they could sell all the lots in a subdivision on the same day, they'd never put any covenants on them. Here's what developers are worried about, though. They don't want to sell the first house in the neighborhood to Clark Griswold with cousin Eddie dumping the shitter in the sewer thing on the front lawn.
Yes.
Because that's going to have a tremendous detrimental impact on their ability to sell the other lots in the neighborhood.
Got it. Yeah.
And so developers very often will attach all these covenants so that they're essentially protecting themselves. Unfortunately, what it does is it makes those rules appurtenant to every piece of land that they sold in there for how long? Forever. So, there are various reasons why you see this, but yeah, transfers when people care about the future of the property, definitely. Okay. So one of the things that, and BJ, it's understandable. This is all a new language. I mean, real estate language is it's a very new approach. In some ways, you're better to start from zero than from what you thought you knew. It's
stressful in the beginning.
It is.
Just hang on.
It is. John, did you have a question?
I do. Travis, kind of hitchhiking off of Mike's point. A family land in the will, it indicates that it's never to be divided or sold.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be the same as
that becomes an appurtenance? That becomes an appurtenance. Exactly. Because the will functions as a deed. The will functions as a transfer of ownership from a grantor to a grantee, and those restrictions go from grantor to grantee. And so it's basically going to make that property very limited for the new owners and what they can do with the property. That's somebody you bury upside down just because you don't like them. And if you already buried them, you dig them up and you flip them over just because they put you in a rough situation there. Okay. So one of the most important questions we have to answer in these transactions when we're transferring ownership is what's included. There's an easy way to say that, but we have to go deeper because you have to be able to answer real application questions about this. What's included, folks, is real property. What's not included is personal property. I'm going to say that again. When we transfer ownership of land, everything that is real property is included. Everything that is personal property is not included. So again, if you will envision, take the land and do what with it?
Flip it upside down.
Flip it upside down.
Flip it upside down. The things that stay attached, are they included when we transfer the land, or are they not included when we transfer land?
They're included.
They're included. Appurtenance is certainly included when we transfer the land. The things that fall away when you flip the land upside down are called personal property, and those are not going to be included in a transfer of ownership. That simple mental game will answer probably 90 to 95% of all your questions about real property versus personal property. But, and this is where you have to be super careful on the test, and this is why this is something we have to talk about. Look what it says down here in the bottom of this slide right here. Look at that statement right there. Unless what?
Otherwise stated in the contract.
Unless otherwise stated, not in the deed, not in the document transferring ownership, but in the contract that the two parties signed about what they would transfer. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Remember, contract comes before a deed. And if the two parties have decided they don't want to follow the basic rule of flip it upside down and everything attached is part of the deal and everything that falls away is not part of the deal, the parties can decide they don't want to follow that rule. But they can only do that if they write it into a written what?
Contract.
Contract
promise.
Promise. That's exactly right.
Okay. If I want the curtains or something, then that has to be written in the contract.
That's it. That's exactly right. And look at, I love Shay. If you've never seen this movie, you should go watch it. Shay's like, I always think of the movie Moving with Richard Pryor. Awesome. If you've never seen it, by the way, because, and I know exactly what scene she's talking about. He and his wife are walking through this house and they're looking at the house and they're like, oh my God, honey, look at this pool. And the sellers are like, don't get too attached to it. We're taking it with us. And that's like the big running joke. They say everything. And then when they finally move in, they literally did that. They took everything. They took the pool. They took the kitchen cabinets. Because the contract said they were taking it with them. Right. And so what we have to be able to understand for test taking purposes is that the only way we overcome what happens by default in a transaction is if we agree otherwise in a contract. Now, a couple of you are asking about, can a contract be broken? Sure, it can. And then it would be up to the two parties to decide if they still want to close. I mean, the recourse, Eddie is on the right track in that the recourse of a buyer is to simply say, I'm not going to do what? If the seller doesn't follow the terms of the contract, what could the buyer do on the day of closing?
Not buy it.
Not buy it. Pete, deuces. Yeah. I'm out. See you. No, I'm not.
They can also choose to buy it, right?
But they can also choose to buy it. Sometimes it's their choice. Or they could choose option number 3, which is what contracts are for. File a what, folks?
A Judge Judy suit.
You go to see Judge Judy, file a
court.
Isn't that the purpose of a contract? Right.
Yeah, so somebody sent a private message and said, what if the previous owner buried valuables or cash in the yard and after the deed is recorded, they want it back? What if life isn't real?
What if I want the first pair of Air Jordans that I had back? I can't have them. You know, there's a lot of things I want back. If it is
buried as attached,
if it's been buried in the ground, it was part of the transaction. It belongs to the new owner of that land. It was transferred.
Because if you flip it upside down, it stays there.
Stays there.
There you go.
Right. Now, Mary Ann asked, where are the appurtenances listed? How do you research your own? Are they all listed on the deed? Well, here's the problem with that question, Mary Ann. There's no such thing. The deed. Every time ownership of a property is transferred, folks, you have a new what?
Deed.
A new deed.
And there you go. Look at Seth's reply. The deed is all of them. Because every single one of those deeds might have added a restriction, couldn't it?
Yep.
And so the only way you can know all the restrictions that have been added is look at how many of the deeds.
All of them. They're all there. They're all public record.
You just keep researching and researching and researching.
Are realtors doing that? I mean,
No, that is a legal service. Whom do we hire?
Yeah, the attorney.
Attorney.
either a grantee does it themselves, or if they're smart, they hire an attorney to do that legal research for them. What do you think? I'm going to break my own rule here, Leslie.
I see you.
What do you think our role is going to be, folks? Is our role going to be to do that research for them?
Nope.
No. What's our role going to be? We're there to provide advice. What is our role?
I
would to advise them to go seek legal advice.
Right. You advise them to hire an attorney to conduct that kind of research to figure out what.
But they ask for restrictive covenants, and we're just giving them whatever the last realtor put on a MLS type of thing.
That doesn't change my answer.
It could be incorrect.
If they ask me for restrictive covenants, I'm going to give them the ones that I can find and the ones that I'm aware of. But am I going to say these are all the covenants, or am I going to say, if you really want to know all of them, I strongly advise you to engage the services of an attorney and have them research this for you?
Thank you.
That's our role.
Yes.
Our role. Okay. So now, personal property. Is it included in these transactions? When we sell land, when we lease land, is the personal property that happens to be on the land at the time that contract is written, is it included in the transaction?
No.
No, it is not. The real property is included. And we call those things that are included with the land fixtures. Fixtures are items that, for whatever reason, have been attached to the land. These are items that used to be personal property at some point in time, but they've been changed to being real property because they have been attached. Somebody took the time to attach them. And
I like to add something to that, Travis. Things that have been attached to the land by the landowner.
There you go. That's a good one. And we're going to talk about that in just a second too.
Yeah.
So these are items that have been made into real property because they have been permanently attached to the property by the owner of the property, by the owner of the land. The person who owns the land decided they wanted this thing to be part of their land. So they attached this thing to their land. Here's what you need to understand from that perspective. We're not saying they can't remove it from their land. As long as they're the owner, can they remove things from their land? Yes. But what we're talking about is the importance of contracts. If a contract is written and two parties have come to an agreement, a promise that 30 days from now, they will transfer ownership of the land, what's included with that land? Not just the land, but the land and everything what?
That's attached to it.
That's attached to the land as of the moment that contract was written. So if a seller wants to take that light fixture with them, when's the time for them to remove it?
Before writing
the contract. Before we write a contract. Probably before they even list it, but definitely before we write a contract. Because at the moment of contracting, aren't we promising that everything permanently attached to the land is also part of the transaction?
Yes.
Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Okay. Now, here is my handy dandy little definition of permanently attached. Has the item been nailed, screwed, glued, or buried on the property? And so, yes, Lisa, you asked earlier, that's why I said that grandma buried in the backyard became an appurtenance, because she is now part of the land. Okay. And therefore she is part of the real property. Now, that does not mean that we absolutely have to transfer this item with the property itself, with the land itself. It just means if we don't specify, then it will transfer. Does that make sense for everybody when I say it that way?
Yeah.
If I write a contract and I say we're transferring 114 Heidinger Drive in Cary, I'm promising everything, including the land and everything attached to the land as of that moment. Sharita asked, what if it's promised verbally but not fulfilled by the seller? Well, I'll forgive you that question right now, Sharita, because we haven't talked about a law called the Statute of Frauds. We're going to talk about a law called the Statute of Frauds that says that real estate sales contracts are not real unless they're in writing. Real estate sales contracts are not enforceable unless they're in writing. So what does that mean about a verbal promise between a buyer and a seller?
Don't exist.
Doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. So we can change the status of these things. We can say that things that are attached are not going to be part of the transaction, but where would we need to specify that? If that's what we want to do, if we want to say, we know there's a chandelier in the living room, but we don't want the chandelier to be part of the sale, where would we need to specify that?
In the contract.
In the contract.
There you go.
Could we also do it in the opposite direction? Could we, in other words, could we take something that is normally personal property and could we include it in the contract in the same way?
Yes. Like appliances?
Like appliances. Buyers often do this with home purchases. What's one piece of personal property that you can think of? Think of turning the house upside down and things that would not be attached. What's one very common one? And there are lots that you can put on this list.
Refrigerator.
Dryer.
How about a refrigerator?
Fridge.
Refrigerator. Absolutely. Gym equipment, Alyssa said. Who wants that shit?
What about washer and dryer?
Yeah, what about washer and dryer?
Washer and dryer.
Washers and dryers, refrigerators, all of those things. Those are not real property. They're not permanently attached, folks. Those are what kind of property?
Personal.
A stove, a range, personal property, because it's not permanently attached in most cases. Now, so when you think about it in those terms, lots of buyers might want to include those things. Can we still include that in a contract?
Yes.
Absolutely.
If
we put it into writing at the time of contract. Alyssa, you mentioned you had a question earlier. Did we cover that or do I need to get something for you?
Sorry. Oh wait, which one?
I think it was Alyssa Thorne. I think you put in the chat you had a question. Was that you?
Yes, I did, but I think we're getting to it right now.
Okay, we're getting to it right now. Okay, good. Shay, you have one as well?
Yes, so if you have a gas stove that's been bolted down to the floor, in essence, then that would become a fixture.
You just answered your own question, and I love it. That's exactly right. If it's a gas stove and it's
Apply the rule.
Flip the house and it didn't go anywhere. Flo, did you have a question?
Yeah, but I think I'm going to let you finish this section of fixtures before I ask. Maybe you might answer it in your next sentence.
Now, Jessica said, even though the washer is connected to water, it is by a water hose. So by that measure, would you think of the sprinkler in the yard as being real property? No. If it's through a connection that's meant to be temporary, which is just a water hose, your water hose, folks, is not plumbed in. It's literally just a spigot, even though it happens to be inside your house, with a hose connected to it. It's made to be connected and disconnected by hand. It's just a water hose. That's all it is. And so that's personal property. If a buyer wants to include it, they would. Here's what you need to understand. On the test, they're not going to give you a lot of detail. They're going to expect you to recognize whether the thing that we're talking about would normally be considered a fixture or would normally be considered personal property, and then would expect you to apply the general rule of thumb, which is that the fixtures are part of the deal and the personal property is not. You only mention, now, this is where you need to tune me in.
Channel 159.
I'm telling you, you're going to miss this on the test if you're not listening to me right now.
Listen, Linda.
It's not as simple as you're going to try to make it in your mind. Oh, if we want to include that, we write it in the contract. No.
Because
write
it may
it.
have the opposite effect.
Exactly. You write it in the contract if you want it to do the opposite of what it would do if you didn't
Normally.
mention it at all.
Right.
So let me point this out to you. Ceiling fan. What would it do if we didn't mention it at all? Would it be part of the sale or not part of the sale?
Part of the sale.
Part of the sale. So if we mention it in the contract, is it part of the sale or is it not part of the sale?
Not part of the sale.
It's not part, because mentioning it makes it do the what?
Opposite of what it intended.
Opposite of what it normally would do. Refrigerator, is it normally included?
No.
No. So if we write a refrigerator into the contract, is it part of the sale or not part of the sale?
Not part of the sale.
It's part of the sale because normally it would not be part of the sale. Does everybody see how that works? You only mention it if you want it to. So if I look at a sales contract, I looked at one like this once. I looked at it. And on page 2, it said fixtures and personal property. And it said all decorative doors in home. That's what it listed. Fixtures and personal property. In that section, it said all decorative doors in the home. This was back when I was a broker in charge of 125 people. Let me ask y'all a question. What do you think the next question I asked the agent was on this transaction?
Are they taking the doors?
I said, the buyer doesn't want the damn doors. And the agent said, oh my God, they love the doors. They want to make sure they get them. I said, that's not what this says. That is not what this says. Because folks, what do doors normally do?
Come included.
The house. Normally are part of the transaction. When they wrote decorative doors in the house on the contract, what were they actually saying?
They want to take them out.
They're no longer included.
Yeah.
You see how dangerous that is? You got to know that you only mention it to flip the script. You're doing the opposite.
And I get this question asked all the time when I'm showing a property to a buyer. You know, they said, oh, those doors are lovely. Look at that glass door. We love it. And then they ask me, well, would you have to write in that we want the door? I'm like, nope.
No.
You're going to get it.
They're part of the deal. We don't want to say anything about, oh, I love these chandeliers. Make sure you include those in the contract. No, make sure I don't include these in the contract.
By using the contract, I already did.
Right. Exactly. So, somebody sent
y'all both a private message.
Okay. Yeah. You want me to read it or you want to read it?
Oh, you're fine. It's fine. You can read it.
Okay, so Seth forwarded me a private question. So what if the intent is for it to be permanently attached, but it's not complete? Like if I was to build a she shed, most of the framing is complete, but there's still wood on the property that hasn't been used. See, that's where you're making your life harder than it needs to be. The part of it that is what? Attached goes with the land. The wood that's laying out there in the yard does not what?
Stay with it.
It doesn't come with the land.
Upside down. Flip it upside down.
Flip the land upside down. So Sharon said, can I repeat the chandelier example? Sure. Is a chandelier normally part of a sale? Ask yourself that question.
Yes.
Yes. Because it's what? Attached. So
but you can easily move it too, right? If you can.
I don't care. Stop making it harder than it is. I can easily move anything. You give me a big enough bulldozer, I'll push your shit right down in the street and be gone. Stop. See, that's where my job is to say, get out of your own damn way. Right? Because that is you.
That is in your way. I'll be straight up.
That is you getting in your own way. And that is so dangerous in this class. Don't do it to yourself. Don't do that.
I have a question.
Right? Nailed, screwed, glued, or buried in the ground means attached. And so to finish up the chandelier, and then I'll come back and get the question there. So with the chandelier, if it's attached, it's part of the deal. So if I look at a contract and it says chandelier in the living room, are they saying they want the chandelier included in the transaction, or are they saying they don't want the chandelier included?
They don't want it.
They don't want it.
Because they only mention it to do the opposite of what it would do if you didn't mention it at all. Does everybody see how that works?
Yeah. Right.
Right. Raquel, did you have a question? You got your hand up.
I did.
so the same would be for real property. Like if there was a backyard full of trees and you're like, I don't want all those trees there. I could put that in the contract because it's a real property, but I want you to remove them before I purchase the house.
There you go. I love this question. So Raquel's making an offer.
Yeah.
And she wants the trees removed from the backyard on the contract. She's just gonna put trees in backyard. Is she saying she wants them included, or is she saying she wants them cut down and removed before closing?
Cut down.
She wants them out of there because normally they would be included. Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it, Raquel. That's exactly how it works. It's exactly how it works.
Yep.
So somebody said they had a question.
I think it was Elisa.
Yes, basically you already reiterated what I wanted to confirm, so we're good.
Okay. Awesome.
Travis?
Yes.
Can you finish the sentence for me? You only mention it in the contract if?
You want to do the opposite.
Okay.
The opposite of what is intentionally
Right.
done in the contract.
You only mention it in the contract if you want to do the opposite. You know, normally shoes are going to be worn on your feet. I only mention them in the contract if I want them to worn on your head. I got to say that in the contract because that's the opposite of what should happen, right? So if I mention a refrigerator, am I including it or am I excluding it?
I'm including.
Excluding it.
A refrigerator, am I?
You're including it.
Want it.
I'm including it because
You want
what would it normally do on its own if I didn't say anything about it?
Goes
would
with
take
the seller.
It would not be part of the deal. Don't
Right.
try to tell yourself goes or stays because you're going to get confused about who is who. Just say part of the land, not part of the land. Okay. Refrigerator, part of the land or not part of the land?
No,
Not personal property.
Right. So if I mention it, what am I making it?
Part of the
Part of the land.
Part of the land. Louise, you just did what I told you what not to do.
Yep.
Right? It's not a definitive statement of you put it in the contract if you don't want it, or you put it in the contract if you do want it. You put it in the contract if you want it to do the what?
Opposite.
Opposite of what it would do otherwise. You're flipping the script when you put it in the contract. The RV in the driveway, it's written into the contract. Are we including it or excluding it?
Including it.
Including it, because it normally, if we didn't mention it at all, would be what?
Personal property.
It would be personal property. It would be excluded, right? So if we mention it, we are including it.
What if it's like one of those grills that you have outside that's like an outdoor grill?
Don't, Fosty, don't make it harder than it is.
Flip it upside down.
Is it nailed, screwed, glued, or buried in the ground? You tell me, it's your question.
They literally make them like, they have like stones on top of it.
Is it nailed, screwed, glued, or buried in the ground? You tell me, it's your question. I don't want to know about stones. I want to know, is it nailed, screwed, glued, or buried in the ground? That's the question you have to answer.
It is glued, so
then it's part of the land. I mean, really, stop trying to memorize. Here's the thing. Y'all think you're making it easier on yourself by answering what if questions like that? You're making it harder because you're trying to memorize 10,000 scenarios when all you got to memorize is one rule.
One rule. Flip it upside down. If it falls, personal property, it does not include in the purchase, in the transaction.
Unless you mention it in the contract, which makes it do the opposite.
Exactly.
Can I ask, well, not ask, but I just, with the example of the grill, the bricks might be there, but the actual grill inside of it might not be permanent. So when you flip it upside down,
and that's why it's a very case by case thing. That's what I'm saying. I can't answer the question without figuring out. Jennifer said, what if you're not sure if it's permanent? You better figure it out. You better figure it out as part of making that offer. If I really wanted that grill, do you think I'm gonna go over there and lift it up and see if it's attached somehow?
Yep.
Yes. You better believe I am. You better find out. That's part of the deal.
Have a question still, or did we answer your question?
Sheree, did you have one?
I do. It may be one that's further down when we talk about contracts, but if you have a situation where, let's say, I want to leave the fridge, is that, because I've heard different things in the past, is that something that is written in the initial upfront contract, or is that something that's amended later to not kind of blur the lines?
Why would you, I mean, why would you depend on an amendment? Why wouldn't you, I mean, the whole purpose of a contract is to, well, an amendment is by definition a change to a contract, and people don't have to change. So when is the appropriate time to get all things included in a contract?
Initially.
Well, initially, but I think I was advised to do this so that it wouldn't come across as if I'm trying to include it in the purchase price.
And
so
okay.
wait and come back and add it later.
Okay, and what if they didn't agree to it later? That's my point.
Oh, well, then I just take it with me. But that's that's why I was asking. Would you do that, or is that something that you would automatically?
You're asking a question that's beyond the point of what we're talking about here.
Right. It just depends on that particular transaction, that particular situation you're dealing with.
We're not talking about negotiating skills or what's going to work in a transaction. We are talking about the legal differentiation between what is a fixture and what's not.
I'll teach you those skills in post licensing. Just hang tight.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
I have a question. So if you have curtain rods, obviously, that are attached to the wall, and curtains that are on those curtain rods, and when you flip the house upside down, those both stay. So those would be a part of the sale unless otherwise stated in the contract.
It really just depends on the whole mounting. I mean, it's a case by case thing, Katie. That's it. Y'all want blanket answers to these. They don't have them. That's why there's a rule. Are you going to have to look at these specific curtains in that specific house and determine?
Yep.
Yes.
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 You're going to have to, because if those curtains are not nailed, screwed, glued, or buried in the ground, they're not a fixture.
Right. It's personal property if they're not.
Personal property, right? And so, like TVs, people ask me all the time about TVs. I'll say, I don't know. You got to look behind the TV, figure it out. Is the TV actually mounted to the wall, or is that just a bracket that's mounted to the wall and the TV's hanging on the bracket? In other words, if you dump the bracket upside down, would the TV fall on the floor? If it would, then the TV's not included. The bracket is, though. You know, and that's why blanket answers don't work for this. It's about applying a rule over and over and over. And that's what you're going to have to do in the real world. It's almost like taking an inventory every single time. So is this going to be an important consideration? Every time you list a house, every time you walk through a house with a buyer and they want to make an offer, are you going to have to start to look around at things?
Oh, yeah.
What if all the mirrors hang on the wall with picture hanging wire? Rather than being screwed, all the bathroom mirrors are from Pier 1, and they're hung with picture wire. Are they
personal?
Are they fixtures or are they personal?
Personal.
Personal. And if your buyer wants them, you better write them in, because otherwise they're not part of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but if the mirrors are screwed to the wall, glued to the wall, they're part of the deal. It is a very case by case situation, folks. It's about that's why it's not about trying to memorize. It's about learning the rule. Is everybody okay with that?
That's it.
Okay.
Did I hear somebody raise their hand? I thought I saw somebody raise their hand.
I think Shay's got her hand up.
Oh, Shay, yeah.
Yeah, so in that case, would oh shit.
Oh, my ears, they burn.
My apologies, all cuss.
No.
Would you write the language in to say personal property included in the contract? Is that how the attorney would word it that way?
Well, you said personal property. Are we talking about all of it? Are we talking about somebody's clothes? Are we talking about the garbage in the garbage cans?
Let's say it was the refrigerator, personal property included, or you would just say refrigerator included.
Okay, so if you put refrigerator included, would a dorm refrigerator fit that description?
Yes.
So do you think it would be important to specify the specific refrigerator that's in the property?
Ask Travis, he might help you with that.
Yeah. Trust me. Be specific when you start including. You better put the serial number, because they're gonna swap it out on you.
Okay.
You know, I'm telling you, folks, the whole purpose is to be detailed. Okay. Okay, good. So when you're trying to determine whether or not something is included on the test or in the real world, check the contract first. Because if they've mentioned it specifically in the contract, we're going to follow what the contract says.
Right. So for example, there are some things that might not be permanently attached, nail, groove, screw, or bury in the ground. But if the parties, the buyer, the seller, agreed that they're going to transfer them over, then you follow what the contract says.
As an example, the most commonly used residential contract in North Carolina says that electric ranges are going to be included in the sale. Now, let me ask y'all a question. Is an electric range attached? No. But is there any reason for me to care if the contract that the buyer and the seller are using already just says we're going to include the electric range? Which one is it? Am I going to say it's not included, or am I going to go with what the contract says?
You follow the contract.
Follow the contract, right? So you always look first at the contract. We only look to apply the rules if the contract doesn't specify. And most of the time, the contract's not going to specify. Okay, most of the time the contract's not going to specify, and that's when this thought process applies. The most important question you have to ask yourself, and it's the one we've been talking about, is this item nailed, screwed, glued, or buried? If it is not, is this fixture or personal property?
Personal property.
Personal property.
Move on.
If it is nailed, screwed, glued, or buried. Now watch out now, test question alert, test question coming from right here, and you're going to miss it if you're not paying attention in this moment right now. You have another question to ask yourself, and Leslie pointed this out to you earlier, but I'm going to do it again here now. If it is permanently attached, if it is nailed, screwed, glued, or buried, you have another question to ask. Was the attachment made by the owner of the land? If so, or somebody they hired. In other words, did they hire an electrician to put that ceiling fan in? Was it their ceiling fan attached to their land? If so, then it's a fixture. If it was attached by somebody who is not the owner, AKA a tenant, it is not a fixture and it is not part of the land. So if we're selling a house that's rented and the tenant has put ceiling fans in every room, are the ceiling fans part of the sale, or are they not part of the sale?
No.
They are not. They are not. Watch out for that on the test.
Yep.
Fair
So that's
warning.
why I always just remember in order for it to be considered a fixture, it needs to be permanently attached by the owner of the land.
That's exactly right.
What about a previous owner to the owner that's currently selling?
Same thing.
We're not talking about same thing. We're talking about at the time the attachment was made, was the thing that was being attached owned by the person who also owned the land? Were they attaching something to the land that belonged to them? If so, that item becomes a fixture.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So as an example, let's say that we'll just take Shay as an example. Let's say she wants to open a restaurant and she rents a blank space in a shopping center. She goes in and she installs walk-in cooler, hood vent, fire suppression system. All of that's attached to the property, bolted to the floor, bolted to the walls. But she is a tenant. The building is sold to a new owner. Walk-in refrigerator, hood vent, fire suppression system. Does it belong to the new owner, or does it still belong to Shay, the tenant who attached it to the property? Shay, the tenant, as long as she does what with it when her lease expires?
Removes it.
Removes it and puts property back in its original condition. That's it.
Yes.
So tenants always have the right to remove anything they've attached to the property as long as they do so before their lease ends. Is everybody okay with that?
Yep. Same thing with paint a wall, right?
Same thing with what?
Like you have to, never mind. Total different thought.
Okay. Now, let's take that to, and by the way, we call these things improvements. Anytime we attach things to the land, we call them improvements. The idea is that improvements add value. Improvement, why my pen's not working all of a sudden? I can't draw all of a sudden. Maybe my battery died. Check that at break. The idea is that an improvement adds value. An improvement makes the property more valuable because of the attachment. And thank you, Leslie. I was she's doing the annotation thing, even though you can't see it because of the color. But
sorry.
And you'll have to clear it when I go to the next screen. I don't know why my pen just stopped working. Battery must have died. But improvements add value, and they are pertinent to the property. Let's talk about one of the things that people like to think of
Huge misconception
as real property that might not be real property. The manufactured or mobile home. Manufactured home, mobile home, trailer, double wide, they all mean the same thing as far as the law is concerned. You may think of them differently, but the law does not, okay? A manufactured home is not meant to be real property. It is meant to be what type of property, folks?
Personal
property. This is a piece of personal property. It is no different than a car parked in the driveway as far as the law is concerned. That is because it is not attached to the land. If you flip the land upside down, what would happen to a manufactured home that was sitting on that land?
It would fall off.
It would fall off. It would fall off. Okay.
That word mobile.
It is mobile at that point in time. And therefore, it is personal property. Why is that important? Well, if you sell something as a real estate agent, are you selling the land or are you selling the personal property? Which one are we selling?
The land.
The land. Which one are we leasing if we lease?
The land.
The land. Folks, is this manufactured home, this mobile home, included in a sales contract or a lease for that land if it's not specifically mentioned? No. Now, some of you are focused on an end goal. You're like, oh, unless it's been attached, but that's true of everything. Don't make this different than any other piece of personal property. Folks, if I buy lumber at Lowe's, is that real property or personal property when it's stacked in the front yard? Personal property. If I build a deck and cement the deck in the ground, is it real property or personal property?
Real.
This manufactured home works the same way. Don't say, but if a bullfrog had wings, he wouldn't bump his ass hopping all the time. That's just the way things work, right? And this thing, when it is purchased, is personal property. And therefore, it is not included. Could you really put a buyer in a bad situation if they didn't understand that and they thought they were buying that 3-bedroom double wide?
Yeah. Yes.
But really, what they're buying is what?
The land. When they show up and the trailer's been moved.
That's exactly right. They show up after closing and there ain't no trailer there anymore.
So Elisa says to fix that issue, would you write it into the contract?
Yes, absolutely. Like any other piece of personal property, can we include this in a sales contract that where the seller is promising not only will I sell you the land, but I'll sell you this piece of personal property as well?
Yes.
Just like any other personal property, you think it'll be important to be specific as to which mobile home we want the property.
And so Kiana asked, would this include like sheds and carports, et cetera, since they're movable? Yes, any sort of movable, portable, if it's not on a permanent foundation, would fall under this same idea. It's really no different treatment than anything else. Is it nailed, screwed, glued, or buried in the ground? If it's not, then it's personal property. Now, obviously, we can and often do convert these things into real property. And the way to do that is to put them on a permanent foundation, take out the wheels, the axles, the towing hitch, all of that needs to go away. And then you basically turn in the title to the Department of Motor Vehicles, because this is a vehicle up to that point. It has a vehicle identification number. You know, Leslie, that's the only way I can discipline myself from saying VIN number is by saying the whole thing out loud, you know.
So I used to work in a car dealership. My family used to own a car dealership, so I dealt with VINs all the time. So I have always been very disciplined to just say the VIN or the vehicle identification number, because I played with those all the time. But people say all the time, well, what's the VIN number? The N in VIN stands for number.
It stands for number. That's exactly right. Exactly.
So like, we were looking into that when we had bought our land, and we were trying to place a trailer on it. And before we started construction for our house, of course, because I found out that it was just personal property. It wasn't really real property. So I just didn't even want to spend, I think it was almost 200 grand just to buy the trailer, with included with the interest and stuff like that. That is crazy. That is not even real property.
It's not. It's personal property. It can be converted to real property. So, you know, just understand that. Here's what's going to definitely be tested about these things, in addition to them being, this is the slide. Star this slide. I can't do it because my.
Oh, I can do it for you.
I'm not righty. This is the slide that you're going to see a test question from. You might see about the personal property thing, but everybody gets that right. This is the one that you're going to screw up because you don't like this answer. I don't care that you don't like this answer. These structures are not safe for human occupancy by law in North Carolina.
What?
Whether you think they are or not, whether I think they are or not, is immaterial. Again, it's not here for us to dictate what we think. It is here for what the law says. The state of North Carolina has minimum building codes that structures must comply with in order to be considered safe for human occupancy. I mean, if you've ever heard of a certificate of occupancy before.
Yep.
A certificate of occupancy is issued once the city, county has inspected a structure and make sure it meets the building codes. Guess what will never be issued for a manufactured home in this state, folks, even if it is converted to real property and attached to the land?
Certificate of occupancy.
Certificate of occupancy. It by law does not meet the minimum building codes in the state of North Carolina. It never will. It cannot be retrofitted to meet them. You cannot improve them by law. I'm going to say that again. You need to know this as a real estate agent, because this is going to be in direct conflict with what you see in the real world. Raise your hand if you've seen a double wide with the front porch put on it.
Yep.
Every single one of them violates the law in the state of North Carolina. You cannot legally make an attachment or an improvement to a manufactured home in this state. They will not issue a building permit for that activity. It is by law unsafe to do it. That doesn't mean it's going to fall. It doesn't mean anything. It just means by law, it is unsafe. And yes, Alyssa, that is why the lending process is very different for these than it is for structures that do comply with the local building codes because those structures have been inspected. Those structures have been built to a certain safety code, and these have not, and they never will be.
Can you insure these?
You can insure them, but it is a very different process than insuring a structure that has met the building codes.
It's like insurance on your car. Same
That's
thing.
right.
Insurance
You
on
can
your
get insurance on a
RV.
car, and it is largely the same thing.
So even if it becomes real property, they still will not.
Nope.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's unsafe, period, according to the state of North Carolina.
Because let me try to fix this for some of you that live in those things, because they're just not built to what North Carolina considers safe.
And that right. We're not saying that as a shot at mobile homes. I mean, 2/3 of my family lives in mobile homes, folks. I mean, seriously. But it is the law. It's the way the law exists in this state. And it simply is, there is no reconciling the fact that a manufactured home is not inspected. It is not issued a building permit. It never will be.
Nope.
Okay. And yes, Kiana, they are beautiful, but so are RVs. I mean, there are $1 million RVs rolling down the road, but that doesn't mean they meet the building codes. And that's the difference. They simply don't go through that process.
I mean, I have a central vac in my RV, which I don't even have in my house. So yes, they can be fancy.
That's right. And so Christina said, would the question on the exam be asked about the building codes? Do they meet the building codes? Yes, but let me go to the next slide and show you why you got to be careful of this. This is where you're going to have to be careful. You ready? You ready? You ready? Here it comes. These are not mobile homes.
Nope.
Modular homes are not the same thing as manufactured homes. Modular homes are not the same thing as mobile homes. Modular homes do meet all of the local and state building codes. They are issued a building permit. They are inspected. They are issued a certificate of occupancy when they are completed. They are treated exactly the same as a site-built home would be.
So what might be the difference, Travis? Because I think a lot of people will connect them. Well, they're built in a factory. They are brought to the site and they are put together in the site, just like a mobile home or a manufactured home. Here's the difference, that although, yes, they're both built in factories, they're both built in pieces to the real property, and they're both attached to the property, these homes, these modular homes, do meet standard building codes according to the state. That's the biggest difference.
And the real property is not the thing to focus on, folks. I know that's what you want to focus on. I know it is. I know it is. I know it is. And that's going to kill you on the test. That's not the thing to focus on, because manufactured homes can also be real property, but manufactured homes can't meet what process?
Safety codes.
The building
codes.
And modular homes do meet the building codes. And so, yes, the name is very important because they both start with M. It is so easy to confuse them. They are not the same thing. And I can thank a student for this in a recent class. You ready? And this to me is the best way to remember it from a student. Modular sounds like model. Think of a modular home as a model home. Would a model home meet all the safety requirements? If it was a model home, would it meet all the building codes? Would it meet all the safety instructions?
Yes.
Yes. And which one sounds like model?
Modular.
Modular. Which one is a trailer? Which one does not meet the safety codes?
Mobile.
Mobile or what?
Manufactured.
Manufactured. Right? Mobile or manufactured does not meet those safety codes. Modular does. I promise that's what they're going to focus on, because they know that's the area where people get screwy on that. Does everybody see the difference there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good. Good. We don't really need to spend time on trade fixtures. Just know that trade fixtures is a terminology you can see pop up on the test. Trade fixtures just means fixtures in commercial settings. So like earlier where I used the example of Shay renting a building and using it as a restaurant. And I said she installed like a hood vent and fire suppression system and a walk-in cooler. All those would be examples of trade fixtures. Are they real property or are they personal property?
Personal property.
They're personal. They can be removed by the tenant. Okay. How about plants? Plants.
Buried, it's real.
It's real property.
There you go. If it's buried, it's what?
Real.
If it's buried, it's real. If it's in a movable pot, it's what?
It's personal.
Personal. That's exactly right. There is only.
But we may have an exception for that, Travis.
There is one exception, and somebody asked about this earlier. I don't remember who it was, but I told you we would get to it. And as
it was
promised,
Nina who asked that. Crops.
Here is the one exception to plants. If it is a crop, even though crops are buried in the ground, crops, and I know some of you did not come from an agricultural background, so I will do some explanation, even though I feel like, oh, I really have to explain what a crop is. Yeah, apparently I do. A crop is a plant that grows one time and dies. Period. You plant it. If you want to see it again next year, you got to do what with it?
Plant it again.
Plant it again.
So pretty much every plant in my house. Okay. Oh, different reason. Never mind.
That's because you killed them. That has nothing to do with the plants themselves. But a plant that does not renew itself, a plant that has to be, so like think about your tomatoes. You don't keep your tomato plants, you throw them away and you go get what?
New ones.
New ones, right? If you grow cucumbers or peppers or corn or any of those things, you got to get new plants every single year. There's no like, I don't care. You can leave the corn out there if you want to. It ain't coming back up next year. I promise.
So I guess it's safe now for me to remove my tomato plants in the back porch?
Yes, your tomato plants can go away. They're not coming back.
I'll do that.
They're dead. But think about your shrubs. Do you have to replant your shrubs every year, or is that something that comes back?
Comes back.
Mums, chrysanthemums, if you want the formal terminology, they come back year after year, Shay. You can plant those in the ground.
Mostly food.
Okay. So crops largely are food. I mean, largely what we're centering on is food. That's not normally important in most real estate transactions, but what if you're selling farmland? Do you think if you've got 100 acres of corn in a field, it's going to be important to know whether or not that corn is part of a sale?
Mm-hmm.
What do y'all think?
Yes.
I mean, how many dollars of value could be out there in 100 acres of a crop?
Well, I was gonna say the value of the property may be based on that.
The crop may be worth more than the land is, depending on the crop and the year, you know. And so it is very important to determine whether that crop is going to be considered real property or personal property. And crops, even though they're buried in the ground, they go against the rule. They are personal property. Crops belong to whoever plants them. So if somebody plants crops on their farm and then they sell the farm, then guess who the crops still belong to?
The farmer.
The one who planted them. The new owner does not get the benefit of the crops. They have to wait for them to be harvested, and the old owner gets them. If a tenant plants crops and their lease expires, guess what has to happen?
Tenants
have to wait till
the tenant gets to come back in and harvest the crops when they're ready, because the crops belong to them. Crops are personal property. Christina asked a great question. Can that be mentioned in the contract? Absolutely. Just like any other personal property can be specified, you could specify, yes, we want to include these crops as part of the sale.
So saying if you mention the crops in the contract, they would be a part of the sale, right?
Yes, exactly, Zeta. If you mention the crops, they would be part of the sale, because normally they would not be. And so if you mention them, you're doing the opposite of what the norm would be. Very good. Okay. One last round of things we need to talk about before we take a lunch break deals with some of the other rights associated with property, specifically the right to access water from your property. We're not talking about the right to access water that you own. If you have a pond in the middle of your farm, you do whatever you want to with that pond, because if the land that completely surrounds it is yours, then the pond is also yours. Does that make sense for everybody?
So we're talking about where your property meets.
That's exactly right. We're talking about where your border, your boundary is the water, which is very common in real estate. If you think about it, when you have lots that are drawn up, if there's a lake there, what's the most common place for the people's property line to stop and start? Do the property lines go 100 yards out into the water, or is there property line at the shore?
Water's edge.
At the water's
At the
edge.
edge.
I mean, if you own land, if you have a lot on one side of a river, do we usually see lots that go on both sides of the river, or is usually the river used as a natural sort of barrier? What do y'all think?
Used as a natural barrier.
Used as a barrier.
It's used as a natural barrier. So it's very common to see water used as a boundary. When that happens, we need to know what rights the landowner has to access the water. And those rights can be broken down into two categories: riparian rights, which is number one. Stupid pen drive me crazy. I gotta find a battery break. Riparian rights, which is the right to access water from your property if the water does not have a tide, or littoral rights, which is the right to access water from your property if there is a tide. So let's talk about the riparian rights first. Riparian bodies of water are simply bodies of water that don't have a tide. A tide is the normal movement of the water higher and lower every day on a regular pattern. Think about it. That does not happen with rivers. That does not happen with lakes. That does not happen. Yes, the banks of a river may swell, they may go down, but that has to do with weather, how much rain we get, how hot it is, those kinds of things, and it takes a long time. That is not, you cannot predict every day that the river's going to come up, the river's going to go down, the river's going to come up, the river's going to come. It doesn't happen like that. What body of water does that happen with?
Ocean.
Ocean.
The ocean, right? So riparian rights pretty much refers to any body of water other than the ocean. When your property borders any body of water other than the ocean, some of those bodies of water are going to be really small, like creeks, ponds. Don't make this harder than it is. A creek or a pond, small or big?
Small.
Small. Lake, small or big?
Big.
Big. River, small or big?
Big.
Big. So if I say river, which one of these categories you think it falls into? Is a river a navigable riparian body of water or a non-navigable riparian?
Navigable.
Navigable. A creek, navigable.
Non-navigable. Non-navigable.
Right? A stream.
Non-navigable.
A lake.
Navigable.
Navigable. Why does that matter? Let me tell you why it matters. Look at these pictures side by side. These are both riparian bodies of water. We have a creek on the left and a lake on the right. Can we agree that there's a vast difference in the size of these bodies of water?
Yes.
Yes. Can we also agree that you could not navigate the one on the left? And don't ask the what about questions with specific bodies of water. Again, that's not going to be, we're not going there. The curiosity definitely killed the cat in that regard. Can we agree that the one on the left would not be navigable?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes. And the one on the right is definitely navigable.
Yes.
Here's the difference.
There's a boat right there.
If the body of water is big enough to be navigable, then the water belongs to the public. What that means is that the public has the right to be on the water at any time, at all times. Can the property owners on the left and right stop the public from using that water in the right-hand picture?
No.
No.
No. But in the picture on the left, if you have lot number one on the left-hand side of the picture on the left, and lot number two on the left, on the right-hand side of the picture on the left, so the non-navigable body of water, you have two lots, one on the left, one on the right. Because that body of water is so small, it does not belong to the public because you can't go anywhere on it. You can't navigate it. Well, if it doesn't belong to the public, where do you think we're going to put the property line?
In the
middle, right in the center.
In the middle. In the picture on the right, where do you think we're going to put the property line since the water is big enough to belong to the public?
The edge.
Right at the edge.
You the land.
It's exactly right. It's exactly right.
All right, I got a lot of erasing to do.
If it's you can do it all at one time. If you go to annotate and clear all,
Got it. Got it.
If you look at these two pictures, if the body of water is big enough for the public to navigate it, then the property line is going to be at the shoreline. If the body of water is so small that it can't be navigated, then the property line is just going to go to the middle. They're going to basically split the water between them. And in the case of like a pond in the middle of a neighborhood, it would just be pie shaped. You know, they would just all meet in the middle. That's all. Pretty simple, right?
Yes.
Now, littoral rights work a little bit differently because this is a body of water that has a tide, which means the shoreline does what on a regular pattern each day?
Goes in and out.
Changes.
High tide and low tide.
It moves. You know, the water's edge is going to be very different at low tide than it is at high tide with this body of water. And so when you look at this type of water, we have to pick a spot, basically. We can't just say the water's edge, because if we say the water's edge, that really doesn't tell us where the property line is, because the water's edge, you know,
it'll be here at 1 o'clock, and then it'll be here, 2 feet in at 2 o'clock, and it'll just move all the time, and it's just not possible.
That's exactly right. So what we do is we say the high tide line. The high tide line is going to be the property line between private property and public property with a littoral body of water. And I really think that's all. I think that's going to be very surface, question, just basically definitional. I don't think you really have to have any further understanding than that. Okay. We talked about the rights to things below the surface. We call them subsurface rights, things like minerals, things like water, things like natural gas, gold, any kind of thing. Yeah. Would all be subsurface rights. And those can be separately sold off from that. I've given you some water terminology. I'm not even going to talk about it in class. Take a look at it if you're not familiar with some of those terms, just so you've seen them before. You don't need to know detailed definitions about them. Again, it's just so you're not completely caught off guard if that word, but I don't think you're going to see any test questions that center around those words. But look at the question like this. It says, Tom owns a farm in Nash County and sells the timber cutting rights to International Paper. 30 years later, Tom's children have inherited the farm property and sell it to Carla, who currently has the right to cut timber from the farm. What do y'all think?
International Paper.
International Paper. And isn't that going to stay the same no matter what happens?
Yes.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. It is. It's going to stay the same. It's not going to change. Okay, good. Very good. Air rights, another example of the rights that a property owner have, extend to the air, because when we buy real estate, we're purchasing not only the surface of the land, but everything above and below the land as well. And then we just make a quick mention of support rights. We owe our neighboring properties supports, which means we can't at any time, do development on our property that's going to undermine the stability of our neighbor's property.
We dig, or you can't build something right on the edge of their property, on their home, because their home can collapse because you made it unstable, pretty much.
That's exactly right. I mean, if you think about it, if I went right up to my property line and I dug a trench that was 20 feet deep, what would most likely happen to my neighbor's property that, you know, is right on the other side of the line?
Collapse.
Collapse.
It would collapse. It would. There's no way around that. And so one of the rights that we have in property is guaranteed that our neighbors won't create those issues for us. And that, folks, is the end of Unit 2.1.
That's a wrap.
Oh, that's a lot.
Yay.
You think that's a lot?
Oh, you think that's a lot? Wait until we get to 2.2.
2.2 is going to